Chapter 21 Missing. After reallocating his talent points, Nethan's skill tree now looked markedly different. Combat Department. Gunshots, 50. Melee Combat 100. Twisted Fruit, 165. Navy 6 Shave, 0. Navy 6 Paperform Painting. General Department. Agility Enhancement, 50. Physical Enhancement, 100. By pushing both his physical enhancement and Twisted Fruit proficiencies to advanced levels, especially the 165 points in Twisted Fruit, Nethan gained a colossal boost in raw power. His strength had effectively tripled, allowing him to channel far greater force through his distortion ability. From his perspective, the reachable radius of his Twisted Fruit technique now extended to nearly 15 meters. In practical terms, he could stand at the center of a 15-meter sphere and twist or warp anything within that zone. Such intensity was more than enough to deflect ordinary musket balls and even enhanced rounds without breaking a sweat. He was confident that, if he braced himself properly, he could even repel the blast of a portable artillery shell outright, emerging from the impact unscathed. After Nethan's ascension was complete, he fell into a calm silence, letting the surge of new power settle around him while the bombardment overhead continued. Down below, the artillery crews had already zeroed in on the old warehouse. Cannon after cannon unleashed its thunderous roar, sending iron shells tearing into the crumbling walls. Less than 2 minutes into the barrage, the building couldn't take any more. With a deafening crash, it gave way in a cloud of smoke and dust. Chunks of masonry exploded outward, scattering debris, and sadly injuring several gang members who'd been too close to the blast zone. The musketeers, their lines of sight blocked by falling stone, ceased fire. Only the heavy gunners pressed on. At the front of the formation, Kapenberg stood unmoved, a lit cigar clenched between his teeth. He watched the ruins with steely calm, then lifted his voice over the din. "Hold your fire!" Instantly, the musket-wielding thugs lowered their barrels. Their small arms were useless against a building already reduced to ruin. But Kapenberg's artillery crews kept working the breaches, ramrodding shells into the muzzles and igniting them with grim determination. Boom, boom, round after round battered the wreckage until, 10 minutes later, not a single wall remained intact. In its place lay nothing but a twisted heap of slag, iron filings, and shattered stone, an obliterated testament to their firepower. Nethan watched it all, feeling the weight of his newfound strength settle around him like armor. The sound of the last shells rattled off the crumbling walls, then fell silent. A young lieutenant, flanked by the remaining gunners, hurried up to Don Capone. "Sir, we're almost out of ammunition. Best we call it off. With firepower like this, even someone dubbed the Iron-Handed Rhodes would have been torn apart long ago." Capone stood in the haze of dust and smoke, staring at the shattered ruin before him. At last he exhaled a lazy ring of cigar smoke and nodded. "All right, issue 2 shells to each gunner. The rest we send in one final volley, call it a funeral salute." "Yes, Don Capone," the lieutenant replied, saluting briskly as he turned to pass along the order. Thunder rolled once more as the gunners obeyed. Each explosion punched deeper into the fortress that had already been reduced to rubble. The Capone men watched with cruel delight. Dare to provoke the Don, and this is the price you pay. Pirates talk big about freedom on the high seas, but in the end, they always end up ashore. When the last blast faded, only drifting smoke and the faint glow of embers remained. Capone strode over to a cameraman crouched at the edge of the wreckage. "Did you get every angle?" he asked. "Every single shot, boss," the man answered, nodding. Capone allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Good." Then he turned his back on the smoldering ruin and walked away. Kapombeki watched them melting. "Own-eaters one last time." "No problem. The whole operation's on tape," he said with a satisfied grin. "That way, no one in the Navy can claim they missed a bounty." He wasn't driven by money, but he understood its power. With enough funds, he could arm his fleet with anything he desired. Ghost Hand Rhodes alone carried a 40 million Bailey price on his head. Add the White Blade Captain, and that total jumps to 75 million Bailey. That sum would equip an army. He nodded to his men. Fallback positions, now. Just as his crew began to pull back, the shattered ruins before them crackled and shifted. The pirates froze, convinced some dormant shell had finally gone off. Moments later, they realized their mistake. A spray of iron and stone rocketed outward. Through the haze of gunpowder smoke, a single figure strode clear of the debris. His clothes were pristine, no tears, no burn marks, only a smudge of dust clinging to his shoulder. Calmly, he brushed the soot away and stepped into the light, unflinching. The men stared, mouths agape. Kapombeki's grin widened. "Well," he murmured, "is this the legendary Nethan coming to see us off?" Nethan stepped out of the shattered ruins with the calm of a man who'd already decided his fate. Around him, rifles and portable field guns were trained on his chest. Across the open square, Kapenberg emerged from the crowd, cigar clenched between his teeth, face twisted into a scowl. "You still think this isn't over, Nethan?" Kapenberg called, mocking. He spat a jet of tobacco juice to the side. "I almost had you when the bombardment hit, but you slipped through my lines, so you should have stayed hidden. Now you dare show your face? Do you really believe that with your handful of troops you can make up a gulf this wide?" Nethan's gaze flicked over the barrels of the weapons aimed at him, then returned to Kapenberg with steady resolve. Without haste, he took a slow step forward, each footfall echoing against the rubble-strewn pavement. Dust rose around him like a halo, and still the enemy held their fire. "There's only one way to find out," Nethan replied quietly. His voice carried strangely well in the tense air. Kapenberg's lip curled. "Open fire." At his command, the guns thundered, boom, 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 sending the ground trembling beneath Nethan's boots. He kept walking, unflinching, every step drawing him closer to the man who'd vowed to destroy him. The smoke and dust swirled in the fading daylight as two wills prepared to clash, and the city held its breath. For a long moment, every weapon in the gang opened fire on Nethan in perfect unison. Rifles, pistols, even the heavy machine guns barked and spat their ammunition in a blistering hail of bullets. And yet, every shot, every shell simply passed right through him. It was as if he were nothing more than a shadow. Unfazed, Nethan continued to stride forward, each step deliberate and unhurried, emerging from the center of the barrage as though it had never happened. The gang members froze where they stood, their grimy faces slack with disbelief. They stared at their smoking muzzles, unable to comprehend why their ammunition had vanished into thin air, and, most frightening of all, why Nethan still advanced. Kapenberg, the gang's de facto leader, blinked twice and shook himself. All the intelligence reports he'd seen had mentioned Nethan's talent for creating illusions, but witnessing it in person was something else entirely. "A phantom," Kapenberg murmured under his breath. "But if that's just a trick, where's the real man?" He snapped his focus outward, ignoring the specter directly before him. Every nerve was on high alert as he swept the area for Nethan's genuine position, readying himself for whatever counterattack might come next. Because illusions or not, one thing was certain: the real Nethan had to be somewhere in that field, and Kapenberg intended to find him. Nethan's Ra's ability could bend light, but had no power over sound. Yet the thunderous roar of gunfire all around him easily drowned out the soft click of his footstep. Kapenberg sensed nothing of Nethan's approach, only a flickering afterimage, like light refracted through water. Realizing that the figure before him was merely an illusion, Kapenberg roared an order. "Don't aim at any one target. Suppress the center. Fire at will." His gang members, still stunned by the uncanny vision, hesitated for a heartbeat before obeying. Muzzle flashes spiraled outward in a 360-degree barrage, bullets tearing through the air in all directions. Suddenly, something strange happened. Midway through their volley, the bullets' trajectories bent into impossible curves, as if the space itself had folded over them. The visual distortion was so startling that every shooter froze, eyes wide. One of them finally broke the silence with a trembling shout. "It's not working. What kind of power is this?" Panic rippled through their ranks. Though they'd hoped sheer firepower would flush Nethan out, all they'd managed to do was feed his illusion and reveal just how helpless they were against it. Chapter 22, The Hailuo Stone Weapon, Part 4. Captain Kapenberg alone stood unshaken while his men scrambled in panic. Spotting that Nethan's true body was still somewhere on the battlefield, Kapenberg barked over the clamor, "Witter, give them to me!" At his command, a lean young man, with a mischievous grin, Witter, sidled forward and withdrew two exquisitely wrought muskets from his belt. Without hesitation, he leveled both barrels and opened fire, sending a scatter of strange, gleaming bullets skittering across the sands. Nethin, sensing the threat, didn't bother to call on his devil fruit powers. He knew those couldn't stop this ammunition. Instead, he relied on pure reflex, darting aside just as a shot whipped past his side, grazing his waist. Heart-pounding, Nethin felt the cold certainty that these were no ordinary bullets. Devil fruit users lived in constant dread of Hyluo stone, an even deadlier nemesis than seawater itself. Only Hyluo-infused projectiles could pass through his devil-granted defenses, and now he understood exactly what Witter was firing. Kapenberg's voice rang out again. "Keep him pinned down. Don't give him a moment's rest." Witter let the guns drop to his hip and began to reload with uncanny speed. Nethin pressed himself behind the shattered remains of a wooden crate, his breath steadying. He needed a plan, and fast. Hyluo stone might neutralize his powers, but it couldn't strip him of his wits. From his vantage point, he studied the firing line, calculating his chances as the next volley clicked ominously into place. Nethin hovered just above the battlefield, the world around him rippling and blurring as beams of sunlight fractured into a dozen wavering images. Like other devil fruit users, Straw Hat Luffy and the rest, he would lose all his rubber-like resilience if he plunged into the sea. But there was another threat: hockey-infused weapons. A single strike coated in hockey could shatter his devil fruit defenses and force him back into ordinary flesh and blood. His own power, the twist fruit, was subtler. When activated, it bent and twisted light around him, cloaking his true position in a haze of phantoms. But the ability only worked through touch. Any projectile that merely grazed his body would be warped at the moment of contact, sliding harmlessly aside. The instant a hockey-coated bullet struck him, though, that patch of flesh reverted instantly. No twisting, no distortion, leaving him vulnerable. Now, the battlefield was a dazzling mess of shifting illusions. Soldiers fired wildly at every flicker of movement. Nethin's real body flowed through the shimmer, dodging with effortless grace. His mirrored phantoms slipped and weaved in perfect unison, frustrating even the sharpest marksman. In theory, he could command those afterimages to move independently of his true form, but the strain on his stamina would be crippling. Better to stay synchronized, conserve energy, and wait for the decisive opening. Kappenberg leaned against the railing, cigar clenched between his teeth, a smug grin spreading across his face as he watched Nethin dodge yet another sea-stone bullet. "You're a devil fruit user," he taunted. "Did you really think I'd charge in blind? I loaded these rounds just for you." Nethin regarded him coolly, expression unreadable. "Sea-stone only works if it hits its mark," he replied evenly. Before Kapenberg could fire again, Nethin's eyes flickered. He vanished in a shimmer of light, and in that same instant, an afterimage flickered at his feet. Seizing the illusion as a foothold, he launched himself forward, tearing into the crowd at breathtaking speed. The sea-stone slugs could hinder his devil fruit powers, but today Nethin was more than just a fruit user. Years of training had pushed his baseline strength to over 10 times that of an average man, and some mysterious reinforcement had tripled it once more. In other words, even bound by sea-stone, he struck with a ferocity no ordinary weapon could withstand. Kapenberg's confidence flickered as Nethin closed the distance in, the blink of an eye, every step promising devastation. The smug captain, cigar still smoldering, realized too late that he'd gravely underestimated his opponent. Thanks to his shaving effect, even without years of specialized training, Nethin's explosive speed rivaled that of a veteran from the Navy's 6th Division. A feral laugh tore from his throat as he tore into the enemy ranks. Wherever he moved, flesh and bone burst apart in a nightmarish, hellish banquet. His velocity, magnified by the distorted light that warped around him, made him all but invisible, impossible to target. Kapenberg's eyes widened in disbelief. He'd never imagined Nethin could move so fast, nor that the refracted phantoms would be such a devastating hindrance. Even his strongest lieutenants, those rare powerhouses among his men, found themselves hopelessly outclassed. In mere moments, dozens of casualties lay at Nethin's feet, with more still falling. Panic crept into Kapenberg's voice as he finally gave the order, "Cease fire! Fall back!" Then, locking eyes on his two most trusted officers, he roared, "Witter, Lecky, do whatever it takes. Stop him!" But Nethin's massacre showed no sign of slowing. The slaughter was beyond anything they had ever faced. Nethin moved through the wreckage like a specter, the air around him shimmering with each pulse of his power. Flesh and bone warped under his devil fruit ability, twisting and shattering as if struck by an invisible hammer. The gang members, armed with rifles and even a few small cannons, stood frozen, uncertain how to fire at illusions. Terror spread through their ranks, and at Becky's barked orders, they dropped their weapons and fled in panic. But two men held their ground. Werther and Lecky, Kapenberg's most ruthless lieutenants, stepped forward clutching long, heavy staves of sea stone. The brittle mineral couldn't be forged into a blade, but as a blunt weapon, it was lethal to devil fruit users. With faces twisted in determination, they charged straight at Nethin's projected center. "Don't let him slip away," Lecky snarled. "You think we haven't killed devil fruit users before? Take him down!" They fanned out, hoping to corner him. Though Nethin's distorted light phantoms still flickered at the edges of their vision, drawing their eyes and warping their aim, he tuned in to the battlefield's sounds. The scuffle of boots, the thud of sea stone clubs, the labored breaths of his attackers. The guns and cannons might have fallen silent, but he could still fight. With a flick of his wrist, the mirages converged, and Nethin prepared to turn their own follow-through against them. Nethin tilted his head to regard Whitty and Lecky, each of them braced with a long Hylu stone staff. "Hylu stone weapons can suppress raw power," he said coolly, "but don't fool yourselves into thinking the stones do the fighting. Tools don't win battles, people do." With that, he drew Chunle, the famed sword of Spring's Joy, from his waist. Placing his feet firmly, he gripped the hilt with both hands and executed a single, razor-sharp slash. In an instant, a pale, almost invisible thread of sword chi sprang to life along the blade and hissed straight toward his two opponents. Nethin had never claimed to be a swordsmanship prodigy, but every warrior learned the basics of blade work in close combat, and sometimes brute strength could substitute for finesse, much like the Navy's lantern step technique. More importantly, his body was so refined that he'd already activated his blue core. With that level of power behind Chunle, there was no way its aura could resist his cut. Werther and Lecky never saw the sword slash, yet they both felt its coming. Their hair rose on end as an invisible blade cut through the air. Instinctively, they slammed their sea stone staves forward. Boom! The moment the slash met the staff, a terrifying force rippled up the length of the sea stone and blasted them backward. Sea stone will negate devil fruit powers and even parry the deadliest swordsman's strikes, but it cannot absorb the raw impact of this blow. Werther and Lecky flew 3 or 4 meters before crashing to their feet. Their legs wobbled, their arms tingled, and they could only stare at each other in disbelief. They were seasoned fighters, unafraid of ordinary swordsmen or raw strength. Armed with sea stone staves and sea stone bullets, they could handle just about any opponent, until now. This was power on an entirely different level. A devil fruit user capable of obliterating foes with sheer physical strength and swordsmanship, yet able to shrug off volleys from guns and even artillery? That was a genuine nightmare. With powers like that, even on the Grand Line, they'd earn a fearsome reputation. A mere 40 million belly bounty scarcely did him justice. Kapenberg's eyes widened as Nethin advanced across the swaying deck of the Black Tide, each step measured and calm. The pirate captain barked orders and leveled his sea tower cannons at the newcomer. But before the gunners could fire, Nethin drew his blade in one fluid motion. A whirlwind of steel tore through the air. Hot metal fragments spat out in every direction as Werther and Lecky, 2 veteran gunners, were hurled 3 meters off their feet, their weapons clattering uselessly to the planks. Kapenberg staggered back, voice hoarse. How? How can someone so young? He wiped sweat from his brow, trying to steady himself. This was not the unstoppable horde of cannon fire he'd been promised. Nethin sheathed his sword with a soft click. "Your plan fails the moment you underestimated me." Silence fell over the ship as every pirate's gaze fixed on the lone swordsman. The West Blue would remember this day. Nethin watched as Kapenberg, having realized the battle plan was a bust, snapped his musket shut without a hint of regret. "Time to pull back," he muttered, turning on his heel to make his escape. But Rhodes wouldn't let him off so easily. Calm as ever, He planted his boot on Kapenberg's heel and lunged forward. Kapenberg, no mere pushover, reacted instantly. With a sharp twist and a backward leap, he squeezed the trigger and sent a spray of specialized seastone bullets hurtling toward Rhodes. Ordinary lead rounds were a nuisance Rhodes could shrug off. His owned reflexes could twist away from most attacks, but seastone was different. Rhodes spun his body just in time, the bullets tearing into the earth where he'd just stood. At the same moment, Werther and Lecky, their first charge thwarted, roared back into the fray, blades drawn and eyes blazing with renewed fury. Nethan tensed, readying himself for the next wave. If Kapambeki falls to Nethan's blade, neither of you will live to tell the tale. But as long as you can stop me, there's still a chance. Tell me, are you willing to die for him? Nethan spoke calmly, his cold gaze drifting to Werther and Lecky as they charged forward to interpose themselves. He relaxed the sword in his hand, letting the point hover just above the ground, and said softly, "Very well, I'll grant your wish." Then, with a single breath, he struck. Nethan's technique lacked the polish of a seasoned duelist, yet he more than compensated with sheer brute strength, lightning speed, and unstoppable momentum. His blade didn't glow with arcane energy, but the air around it twisted into a roaring gale, as though it could split mountains and shatter the earth itself. Werther and Lecky's hearts leaped in their chests, but neither faltered. Teeth gritted, each seized a long staff hewn from Hailu stone and met the descending sword with all his might. Clang! A shower of sparks erupted where metal met rock. Hailu stone was famed for its toughness, so tough that Chunle, a 21st-rank swordsman, could never carve a notch in it, and yet here it stood, unmoved, holding Nethan's ruthless blow at bay. Nethan's dual Hailu stone longswords burned with fierce energy as he drove both blades down upon Werther and Lecky. Each strike rattled the earth beneath their feet, cracking the stone floor in brutal, inch-wide fractures. Despite their desperate efforts to resist, Werther's and Lecky's faces flushed crimson and their arms trembled under the onslaught. It was clear they'd reached the very limits of their strength. With no hint of hesitation, Nethan let loose a savage slash. A shockwave of sword chi gouged a 3-foot-wide chasm in front of him, and the two men tumbled to their knees as the ground split apart. Seizing the moment, Nethan calmly leveled his blade at Werther's chest and thrust forward. The tip of the sword pierced straight through Werther's heart. "Werther!" Lecky screamed, abandoning his wounded comrade as he swung his iron staff in a last, desperate counterattack. But his arms had gone limp from exhaustion. He could barely lift the heavy weapon. In a single, fluid motion, Nethan caught Lecky's staff with the flat of his blade and shattered it. Lecky was hurled backward, helpless and unarmed. Before he could recover, Nethan's blade arced through the air, precise and merciless, and Lecky's head sailed into the sky as blood spattered down around them. Nethan wiped his blade clean and sheathed it without a second glance at the fallen Werther and Lecky. Their lives had been snuffed out so easily that he felt almost bored. Pulling his hood back, he turned his gaze to Kapenberg, a lone silhouette racing down the street, already a block ahead. In a heartbeat, Nethan's foot slammed into the cobblestones and the pavement shattered outward like a spider's web. He channeled every ounce of power he possessed into that single step. The next instant, he was airborne, an arrow loosed from its bow, tearing across the empty thoroughfare. He barreled past the first street in the blink of an eye and closed in on Kapenberg just as the fugitive reached the midpoint of the second. Behind the staccato bark of gunfire erupted. Kapenberg spun and emptied another volley over his shoulder, a desperate hail of bullets meant to keep Nethan at bay. But the distance between them had shrunk so dramatically that each shot sailed harmlessly by. 7 rounds had hissed past a moment ago, 5 more followed. And now, Nethan was convinced the man's ammunition was spent. He pressed on without hesitation. In a single bound, he landed directly behind Kapenberg. With fluid precision, Nethan drew the sword he had just stowed and slashed in a deadly arc toward the man's shoulders. Kapenberg's legs buckled as if struck by a thunderbolt, until, in that instant, a new figure burst from a nearby alley. Clad in a dark, flowing cloak emblazoned with the emblem of justice, the stranger moved with equal measure of speed and grace. He swept in and grabbed Kapenberg around the waist, yanking him out of Nethan's path. The blade bit the air, stopping less than a foot from its target. The resounding clang of steel on steel echoed through the deserted street as both warriors froze, eyes locked across that narrow gulf of steel. A massive shark-tooth blade clattered to a halt just inches from Kappenberg's nape, filling the space between him and Nethin's outstretched sword. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stall. Nethin narrowed his eyes at the Navy officer who had appeared without warning. The man's shoulder boards gleamed with general-level insignia, far beyond the colonel ranks, Nethin knew, and yet the stance, the voice, felt oddly familiar. At last, Ghost Hand Rhodes. The towering officer drove his sword forward, pinning Rhodes's blade mid-swing. His face was hidden behind a menacing bull-skull mask. In a calm, even drawl, he announced, "I'm the Commandant of the T4 branch in the Western Seas. You may call me Commandant Bastiu, or Major General Bastiu." Nithin's mind raced. Bastiu. Once a lieutenant general at headquarters, he'd served under Fujitora during the Dressrosa campaign. Now here he stood, a major general relegated to the outpost in the Western Seas. The balance of power had shifted, and Nithin knew this confrontation was only the beginning. The West Sea held very few naval bases, most forces posted to its island outposts, and its senior officer was only a naval colonel. Now, only a handful of major generals remained with the guts to hunt down Rhodes, the so-called Ghost Hand. Colonel Kapambeki, cigar clamped between his teeth, surveyed the landing beach with satisfaction. He'd spent days plotting Rhodes's destruction and even laid out contingency routes of retreat in case anything went wrong. 2 hours ago, fresh intelligence had come in. The West Sea Fleet had just arrived and touched down. Turning to face Rhodes, Kapambeki curved his lips in a triumphant sneer, as one victor might mock a vanquished foe. "Every operation needs to account for the chance of failure," he drawled. "Always, always have a guaranteed exit strategy." He chuckled, flicking ash from his cigar. Rhodes, now known to his friends as Nethin, let his sword, Chunla, slip back into its scabbard. Its blade slid over the metal of the shark chopper knife at his hip, sending a brief shower of sparks into the salty air. But neither weapon bore so much as a nick. Nethin's gaze drifted to the assembled officers. Despite the arrival of the official navy, the West Sea Command here looked more like a gang's war council than an imperial force. He regarded the rear admiral before him with cool detachment, as if weighing just how much longer Kapambeki's smug confidence would hold. Bastius snorted and hefted his enormous shark-tooth blade onto his shoulder. "So this was just a public tip," he growled. "Are you going to catch him yourself, or do you want me to beat you senseless first, then haul him in?" He hated gangsters, and the idea of aiding one disgusted him. Yet Navy headquarters' orders were absolute. Every West Sea outpost was to spare no effort in hunting down the so-called GH, Ost Hand Rhodes. That directive had sat on Bastius's desk for months, and until now, the waters had been eerily quiet. Nethin glanced coolly at the gold epaulette on Bastius's shoulder, then shifted his gaze to Captain Kappenberg, who stood a few meters away, cigar glowing in the dim light. Unexpectedly, Nethin let out a low, soft laugh. "Why are you laughing?" Bastius demanded, tightening his grip on the blade's hilt. Nethin lifted his head, and for the first time a new expression flickered across his face. It wasn't a genuine smile, yet it was unmistakably one. There was something cruel in the curve of his lips, something utterly bloodthirsty, and strangely exultant. "Rear Admiral," he said, his voice hushed but unwavering. "Now that's a rank worth pursuing." Chapter 24. Bastius stared at Nethin, baffled. He couldn't tell whether the young man considered his own rank outrageously high or embarrassingly low. All Bastius saw in Nethin's eyes was a predator's gleam, as if he'd found a helpless creature to hunt. The look struck Bastius as absurd. Prey? The thought itself was laughable. Bastius was the director of the T4 branch base in the Western Sea, superior to every naval colonel in his jurisdiction. He'd personally crushed pirate crews carrying bounties north of 50 million Baileys on more than one occasion. Given his record and years of service, he was on track for a headquarters posting or even promotion to lieutenant general at a major base along the Grand Route. How dare this upstart stare at him like that? Moreover, the branch fleet under Bastius's command had 2 warships anchored just offshore. If Nethin tried to run, those vessels would reduce him to splinters before he'd sailed half a mile. Bastius's calm demeanor snapped. "It seems you're unwilling to surrender," he growled. Behind the bull-headed mask, his eyes gleamed with ruthless intent. No one could guess exactly what vicious expression lay beneath, but everyone in the room knew there was one. Nethan stood firm, both hands gripping the hilt of his shark-toothed blade. The sheer force he radiated made even Kapombeki, watching from afar, sit up straighter. Reports crackled in through the runners. Godfather, Lord Whitty's musketeer detachment suffered 114 casualties, and the artillery team lost 19 men. The toll was severe, but the battle's momentum remained unchanged. Gang members and naval troops alike fell in around Kapombeki's position. A hulking enforcer knelt to deliver the numbers in a low voice. Though the Royal Navy openly despised pirates, strict orders bound them to tolerate Kapombeki's presence, no matter how deadly his crew. The losses stung, yet did little to alter the larger conflict. Calmly puffing on a cigar, Kapombeki's eyes flicked to where Bastio and Nethan faced off some 20 paces away. Bastio carried himself with proud confidence, yet he showed no hint of underestimating Nethan. After all, only a pirate of extraordinary talent could send the entire West Sea into turmoil. A slow, mirthless chuckle rose from Kapombeki's throat. Then, drawing his own shark-tooth blade, he lunged forward, swinging with brutal force. The air seemed to shudder around the arc of his strike as the blade whistled toward Nethan, intent on cutting him down where he stood. Bastius hefted the massive shark-slasher blade, relying on its sheer weight to carve sweeping, invisible arcs through the air. But raw power carried a fatal flaw. It was slow. The moment the blade began its descent, Nethan sidestepped almost imperceptibly. His eyes were serene and focused, like a lion sizing up its prey, betraying none of his next move. With a single fluid step, he closed the gap. Nethan unleashed the shave technique from the 6th Naval Form, an attack Bastius knew well, having read every scrap of intelligence about his opponent's skill to bend steel or even deflect bullets with his bare hands. Undeterred, Bastius swung the shark slasher again with all the force of an avalanche. At such close quarters, the impact would have pulverized most opponents. Yet in an instant, Nethan's body went supple as parchment. He slipped out of the blade's path with the effortless grace of a paper dance, and the heavy weapon buried itself in the packed earth behind him. Before Bastius could recover, Nethan's fist shot forward. He drove it hard into the gap between Bastius's ribs, squarely between chest and abdomen, sending a crack of bone echoing across the arena. Bastius staggered, the wind knocked from his lungs, as Nethan stood poised to press his advantage. Bastio towered over Nethan, nearly twice his height, but when Nethan's fist shot out, the giant didn't even attempt to block. The blow struck him squarely in the back, and Bastio stumbled forward, momentarily stunned. Nethan's eyes were calm and unshaken, as though he'd foreseen every move. In a single fluid motion, he sprang up, twisting his body in midair, and slammed his hand down on the haft of Bastio's enormous shark-slash blade. Click. The massive weapon buckled under the impact. 1/3 of its edge spiraled into a jagged twist. Bastio bellowed in fury. Raising the shattered blade with both hands, he unleashed a fierce 3-pronged slash, a whirlwind of steel that split the air like paper. Nethan only let out a soft snort. He didn't back away. Instead, he planted his feet, braced his fists, and met one of those desperate arcs head-on, driving his fist upward to meet the blow. Although Bastio's strength had diminished when his blade bent, he still threw himself into the attack with reckless abandon. For a heartbeat, the two forces collided, metal screeching against bone-tightened muscle, before Nethan's counterstrike sent shockwaves through the clearing. Bastio's slash faltered. "Is that all you've got?" Nethan whispered, his voice low but carrying across the field, as the giant reeled from the impact. The 3 sweeping arcs of Bastio's blade came in a single, fluid motion. 2 aimed to cut off Nethan's escape, and the 3rd to strike him head-on. The first 2 whistled past, but the final slash met Nethan's fist squarely. In that instant, the usually invisible blade froze and flickered into view for a heartbeat, its shape trembling with raw energy. Then, with a thunderous crack, Nethan's twisting force collided with the slash. A gale burst outward, blowing dust and shattered wood fragments in every direction. Bastio's sword chi distorted under the impact. It shivered and then exploded into countless razor-sharp shards that peppered the ground and gouged the surrounding walls. Riding that shockwave, Nathan advanced another step and thrust his hand forward. His fingers closed around the tip of Bastio's shark-tooth cleaver. A sharp metallic clang rang out as Bastio yanked his blade back, but it was already too late. Under Nathan's grip, the cleaver's tip buckled instantly, twisting and crumpling into a jagged iron knot threaded with fractures. Major General Bastius's shark chopper blade groaned under the impact, its center twisting and splintering until only the final third remained whole. His legendary weapon, on the verge of destruction. Could this really be one of those devil fruit powers naval intelligence had only whispered about? Dozens of officers surrounding the clearing stared in stunned silence as Nathan's ghost hand struck true. Beads of cold sweat formed on the colonel's brows. No one had imagined Nathan's strength could rival the commander's. If Bastius fell here, the fallout would be unthinkable. "Snipers, lock onto that ghost hand," an aide barked. "Majors and above, fall in. Assist General Bastius." Alarmed by the sudden turn, the colonels at the T4 base wasted no time. They rallied their squads, moving in to bolster Bastius and help contain Nathan's relentless assault. Bastius had believed he could handle Nathan alone, but the young warrior's power had taken him by surprise. Now, with reinforcements converging just as he needed them, Bastius allowed himself a flicker of hope, though he knew the real battle was only just beginning. "It looks like I only received one line of the chapter. Could you please provide the full text you'd like me to revise? Once I have the complete passage, I'll rewrite it into polished, idiomatic English and rename your protagonist to Nathan." Chapter 25, The West Sea Trembles. From a distance, Commander Kapenberg, tasked with cleaning up this mess, watched anxiously as Major Bastius dueled against the notorious ghost hand, Rhodes. Something about the fight unsettled him. Could the 4-star generals at the West Sea base really contain a warrior like Rhodes? Their naval contingent seemed dangerously overmatched. A Navy sniper nestled into cover far away, methodically lining up his shot. Kapenberg ground his teeth around his cigar, eyes narrowing. Suddenly, 2 gunshots echoed. Boom! Boom! Both rounds cracked against the fractured stone behind Nathan. Even without aiming directly, the bullets rebounded, veering off toward the 2 majors who'd been pressing the attack on Rhodes. These weren't ordinary rounds, but high-loose stone bullets, exceedingly rare and costly to produce. When they struck, each shell tore through its target, punching gaping blood holes in their torsos and sending both officers crashing to the ground. "Cease fire," someone barked. "Regular bullets are useless on him." Kapenberg exhaled a plume of smoke, realizing he was watching something far beyond standard naval warfare. The West Sea had just begun to tremble, and he wasn't at all sure it was ready for what came next. Bastius's shout echoed across the docks as he signaled the waiting naval squadron. At that precise moment, Nathan sprang into action. Surrounded by more than a dozen high-ranking officers, he showed no sign of hesitation. With a single thunderous punch, he crushed 3 standard-issue steel swords into a tangled heap of scrap. 2 lieutenant colonels were blasted off their feet, tumbling through the air as metal shards rained down around them. Boom! Nathan's form blurred as he darted through the enemy ranks. Although the majors and captains drew their blades, they simply couldn't match his speed. His grip, and the mysterious twisting power granted by the twisting fruit, turned every weapon he touched into warped, useless metal. In the space of a heartbeat, officers were sent flying, all defenses shattered by the force of Nathan's assault. Even the few colonels who managed to raise their swords faltered under his onslaught. Their weapons, too, buckled and snapped the moment Nathan clapped his hands around them. Bastius ground his teeth in frustration. If he hadn't kept up the pressure, brandishing his half-abandoned shark-tooth knife to hold the colonels at bay, they would have fallen long ago. In the face of Nathan's twisting power, massed ranks and group tactics counted for nothing. Anything he touched, he could bend and break at will. Though it couldn't strike from a distance, Nathan's power in close quarters rivaled even the tremor fruit. Only those armed with sea-stone weapons, or those whose strength and mastery of armament hockey reached exceptional heights, could hope to withstand the force it unleashed. The moment anyone unprepared made contact, bones shattered and blood sprayed in an instant, leaving nothing but broken bodies and scattered gore. Stepping over smoldering fragments of gravel and mounds of torn flesh, Nethan waded through Bastius's naval squadron with cold efficiency. His blade flashed, cutting down sailor after sailor, and still his face remained placid, utterly devoid of shock or hesitation. Not once did he flinch at the carnage beneath his feet. There was no panic in his eyes, only a relentless calm that felt wrong to anyone who watched. "It's like facing the devil himself," one besieging captain hissed, stomach churning as he backed away. Seasoned admirals had fought monsters and madmen before, but never someone so indifferent to life, so contemptuous of death. That unshakable serenity was far more terrifying than any frenzied rage. A short distance off, Commander Kappenberg witnessed the massacre and felt his blood run cold. He clenched his fist, unwilling to sacrifice more men in a fight they could never win. With a grim nod, he issued the order, "Fall back! Regroup at the docks, now!" As the captains turned and fled, Nethan's silent figure stood, awed against the smoke and ruin, the calm eye of a storm no one dared challenge. Almost the moment Major General Bastius gave the order to fall back, the handful of naval colonels still holding the line collapsed under Nethan's relentless assault. With a harsh crack that echoed across the field, Nethan rammed his shark-slasher knife against Bastius's blade, twisting it apart in a single brutal blow. Disarmed, Bastius could no longer unleash the dreaded strike Rhodes had warned them about. Seizing the advantage, Nethan cut down several colonels who tried to rally. Bastius froze, staring in horror at the shattered flesh and bone littering the ground. Nethan advanced with deliberate steps, teeth clenched, fury and panic warring in his eyes. "Fire!" Bastius bellowed. From the rear, the panic-stricken naval troops opened up on Nethan. Every bullet, however, peeled away harmlessly under the influence of his distortion aura. Calmly, Nethan balled his right hand into a fist and struck. Instinctively, Bastius thrust up the iron block of the Navy's 6th formation, the very shield designed to stop bullets. But Nethan's punch landed with such ferocity that the iron shattered like glass, splintering beneath that single, devastating blow. Nethan gripped his opponent's arm and twisted. Steel-hard muscle gave way with a sickening crunch. Boom! He took a single step forward and pressed his boot down on the fallen Rear Admiral Bastius. Though the mask hid the man's face, Nethan was certain he could feel the Admiral's panic, the taste of regret, or was it pure, burning rage? A slow, cruel smile curved Nethan's lips as he shifted his weight, channeling every ounce of force into his foot. Flesh and bone exploded outward like an overripe melon under a hammer. Warm spray painted the deck. Every naval officer still standing froze in that moment. Guns lowered, voices died on their lips, and hearts stalled in their chests. The men's limbs locked, their minds blank with terror. No one dared intervene. No one dared flee. But this was only the beginning. Nethan lifted his foot, and the rain of gore ceased. The deck lay in stunned silence, every witness rooted in place by the sheer brutality they'd just witnessed. Nethan wiped his blade clean, his face composed once more. The battle was finished. Nethan's clothes were torn and scuffed, but astonishingly clean, an eerie contrast to the blood-soaked chaos he'd just left behind. The instant Bastius collapsed, a clear, familiar chime rang in his mind. System, objective complete. Defeat Rear Admiral Bastius, T4 West Sea Base. Rewards, plus 80 talent proficiency, 1 free talent point. Not a bad haul at all, Nethan thought, letting a small smile curve his lips. He turned toward the fleeing silhouettes of Kapambeki's men. Only one target remained. With barely a pause, Nethan sprang forward. In a single bound, he cleared more than 10 meters, cutting across 2 narrow streets. Then, without breaking his stride, he leapt again, landing as quietly as a cat in the heart of the scattering gang. Their eyes widened in shock. Their leader, Kapambeki, stood frozen, face twisted in disbelief. "Game over," Nethan said softly, meeting Kapambeki's gaze with unsettling calm. 2 days later, newspapers across the West Sea blared the headlines. T4 West Sea Base falls. Rear Admiral Bastius defeated. Rumors of a lone warrior turning the tide spread like wildfire, but no one could say for certain who this mysterious hero truly was. In the kingdom of Smaller, Captain Nethan Ghost Hand Rhodes of the Ghost Hand Pirates has shattered the fragile peace. Acting without orders, he ambushed the Capone family's gang in the harbor district and assassinated their godfather, Kapambeki. His rogue strike drew the immediate attention of the West Sea Navy's T4 branch headquartered nearby. Base Director Bastio personally led a squadron of warships to root out Rhodes and his crew at the old White Blade Pirates encampment, but Rhodes had anticipated the attack. In a brutal ambush, he and his men cut down Bastio and all 5 of accompanying colonels, leaving no survivors. News of the massacre spread like wildfire. Known for his cold-blooded ruthlessness and flagrant insubordination, Nethen now stands as public enemy number 1. Navy headquarters has dispatched a major general to assume command of the manhunt and bring Ghost Hand Rhodes to justice. To underscore the threat he poses, the Navy has doubled his bounty to a staggering 64 million Bailey, overtaking dual-blade Captain Diluo and vaulting Rhodes to the top of the West Sea's most wanted list. From Silent Bay to Ironport, every port is abuzz with the news. The hunt for Captain Nethen Rhodes has begun. Chapter 26. The Land of Flowers. The pirate ship flying the Ghost Hand flag carved a steady course across the open sea under full sail. In the captain's cabin on the upper deck, Nethen lay face down on the reinforced wooden floor, palms planted firmly as he pushed himself up and down in perfect rhythm. 2 massive steel dumbbells rested on his broad shoulders, turning every repetition into an exercise in sheer will. 993. 994. He counted silently, sweat beading on his brow. His arms shook with the effort, but the muscles in his torso, seemingly no more impressive than any other sailor's, channeled enough power to take down a pirate whose bounty was 50 million berries. 999. 1,000. With that final, silent tally, Nethen let his body collapse onto the deck. He dropped the weights to either side, lay on his back, and panted for breath. A slick of sweat spread around him like a dark halo. Dong, dong, dong. A persistent knock sounded at the door. Nethen groaned, unwilling to move, and called out in a lazy drawl, "Come in, and don't forget the lemon tea." Nethen lay sprawled on the bench, staring blankly at the ceiling, when Robin stepped into the cabin carrying a tray with a steaming teacup. He neither stirred nor showed surprise. He merely tilted his head, offering her a faint, knowing smile. Gently, she set the tray on the small table beside him. For a few heartbeats, Nethen said nothing. Then he rose onto one elbow, reached for the cup, and drank deeply. Setting it down, he asked, "Where are we now?" Robin's shoulders relaxed. In a soft voice, she reported, "By our calculations, Captain, we should have entered the Flowerland's waters as of yesterday." Robin wasn't yet an expert helmsman, but Rhodes had insisted she learn enough seamanship to take command if he were away. She'd absorbed the lessons quickly, well enough to navigate a standard trading vessel. Still, neither Rhodes nor Robin was skilled enough to race along the notorious Great Rote, whose capricious weather could turn a voyage upside down in hours. Rhodes had deliberately chosen not to invest his scarce talent points in a mundane skill like sailing. Between his arcane research and a healthy dose of laziness, especially about charting wind directions, he preferred to leave that work to others. As Robin had proven, though, she was more than capable of guiding the ship through calmer seas. And for now, that would have to be enough. Nethen finally shook off the last of his weakness and fatigue as Robin's voice cut through the muggy air of the ship's cabin. "We've entered the Flower Country's waters," she reported, unfolding a chart, "and our intelligence suggests the White Bear pirates, wanted for 45 million berries, are hiding somewhere along these coasts." Nethen set down his cup with a calm nod. "Then this is where we make our move. But first," he added, "we'll need a professional navigator. Out here in the West Sea, there's no telling what currents or shoals we might face." Robin raised an eyebrow. If we were in the East China Sea, Rhodes wouldn't hesitate. He'd try kidnapping a Lolita Nami in a heartbeat. But the West Sea's far trickier. Worse still, the Flower Country isn't exactly on friendly terms with outsiders. "I know," Nethen said with a wry smile. "Rhodes has told me about their massive government-backed pirate fleet. Their pride and joy is the 8 Treasures Marine Corps." Robin tapped the map at a jagged stretch of coast. Their commander, nicknamed Green Pepper for that cone-shaped helmet, once roamed the Grand Line freely. He carried a 500 million berry bounty until Admiral Garp flattened him with a single punch. Since then, his strengths never recovered. Nethen studied the chart again. If the flower country's real power still lies in the Grand Line, our best bet is to strike fast before they can reinforce their fleet here. We'll recruit a navigator at the next port, and then we hunt down the White Bear pirates. Robin folded the map and handed it back. Understood. I'll have the crew ready. Nethan stood and stared out at the endless ribbon of sea. A new challenge lay ahead, but with the right crew and a solid plan, this West Sea wouldn't hold them back. In the West Blue, the Navy has stationed a handful of reserve squadrons. Their commander, Captain Green Pepper, may be pushing 50 or maybe more, but that only seems to make him more eager to charge headlong into any scrap. These reserves are scrappy, but they're prone to rushing in without thinking. Our captain, Nethan, on the other hand, appears to know the land of flowers inside and out. Robin glanced at him curiously. She'd been gathering what little intelligence she could on that kingdom and intended to share it with him, though her knowledge was admittedly patchy. Nethan simply shrugged. Aside from dealing with the White Bear pirates, our top priority is to secure the keel timbers and hull planking for our new ship in the Flower Kingdom, he said. Then we'll make for the land of artisans to hire a master shipwright and have her put it all together. Otherwise, we'll end up sailing halfway across the world just to chase down supplies. Robin stepped back and listened quietly. She didn't question Nethan's plan. She respected the calm authority with which he'd laid it out. He might not be the single strongest fighter she'd ever met, but in all her travels, she'd never stood beside someone so composed and self-assured. It wasn't a brash, in-your-face arrogance, more a steady confidence that hid in the depths of his eyes and surfaced only in small, telling moments. Robin had watched him closely and caught those flickers every time. Nethan couldn't help but marvel at Captain Robin's self-assurance, an almost otherworldly calm that radiated from her in every movement and glance. He'd faced countless hardened commanders in the underworld and ruthless pirate captains, but none matched the sheer composure and focus she displayed. Despite wielding enough power to dominate the entire West Sea, she insisted on rigorous daily training and cultivation. She lived for those sessions, practicing her forms, refining her technique, and even made time for a soothing shoulder massage afterward. "You've thought it through, then?" Robin asked, her lips curving into a brief, confident smile. Nethan nodded. "Yes, Captain." With that, she stepped out of the chamber. The door clicked softly behind her. Alone now, Nethan grabbed a towel, wiping away the sweat that clung to his brow and shoulders. He took a deep breath, readying himself for another set of exercises. He'd unlocked remarkable abilities through the talent system, enhanced strength, superior agility, but he knew none of it would last without relentless practice. Every drop of sweat, every drill he completed, was proof that his power still sprang from his own perseverance. And so he pushed himself onward, determined to match the unshakable poise of the woman he served. Nethan stood in the empty training yard, wiping sweat from his brow as he reviewed the mechanics of his universal talent, physical strength enhancement. It wasn't a simple, fixed bonus. Its effects scaled with both his raw power and his proficiency. For example, if his natural strength measured 100 jins, activating the enhancement would raise it to 150 jins, a 50% increase. Likewise, if he could already press 1,000 pounds, the talent would boost him to 1,500 pounds, not a mere 1,050. That's because this gift doesn't grant a flat bonus. It multiplies whatever base strength he brings to it. Right now, Nethan's proficiency in strength enhancement stood at 100 points, which translated into a threefold benefit. Every ounce of progress he made through training, every additional jin of muscle, every extra pound of lifting capacity was tripled by his talent. To anyone lacking this gift, those same efforts would yield only a single increment of improvement. Most fighters sailing these seas, no matter how fiercely they trained, could never hope to match even half of what legends like Carp or Whitebeard could do. But for Nethan, it was different. He needed only to condition his body to 1/3 of Carp's raw strength. The talent would carry him the rest of the way, propelling him to that master's level in a single bound. Of course, reaching even 1/3 of Carp's power was a Herculean task in itself. As every veteran knew, the nearer you get to the summit, the thinner the air, and the tougher it is to keep climbing. But Nathan was determined. With his talent owned and his training unrelenting, he would find a way to break through that ceiling and stand among the strongest. Nathan wasn't a mathematician. Precise calculations weren't his strength. He only needed to know that his training delivered results. When he'd slain Rear Admiral Bastius 2 months ago, the talent proficiency he earned still hadn't been fully spent. Since then, he'd only brought down one other quarry, a pirate carrying a 34 million Bailey bounty, but his total haul had already swelled to 90 million Bailey. That windfall had fueled his pursuit of the White Bear pirates into the Land of Flowers, where a 45 million Bailey reward waited, and along the way he'd invested in the core materials for his new ship. Now, aboard his vessel, Nathan settled into the captain's quarters and summoned the talent system. A holographic interface hovered before him, cleanly laid out. Scanning the bottom of the display, he saw exactly what he'd hoped for. 1 free talent point ready to assign, and 110 proficiency points waiting to be spent. A confident smile crossed his face. With these resources at his fingertips, it was time to choose his next upgrade, and sharpen the edge of his legend even further. Chapter 27, Moonstep. Nathan flipped through the talent interface, pausing first at the combat department. He was about to switch over to the general department to invest in some physical enhancements when something caught his eye. At the very top of the combat talent tree, a branch that had been dull gray suddenly glowed emerald green, activatable. He stared at the skill name in surprise. Chromatic Domination. It can't be, he muttered under his breath. The system must have recalculated his stats, and somehow he'd met the prerequisites to unlock this high-tier ability. His heart skipped a beat as he glanced sideways at his older brother, half expecting him to react, too. But on the other side of the split talent path, the armed chromatic branch, the icon remained stubbornly gray and inaccessible. Clearly, Nathan's physique hadn't yet reached the threshold required to harness the combative variant. He could activate the knowledge color aspect of chromatic domination, but not the armed color. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. Could it be the side effect of unlocking paper painting earlier? That ability had drawn on the principle of form and essence, almost like an embryonic knowledge color. If so, perhaps he'd unwittingly laid the groundwork for this breakthrough. Taking a slow breath, Nathan settled his resolve. He would claim chromatic domination now, then train his body until he could master the armed color as well. A new path was opening before him, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. Nathan studied the paper painting skill in the 6th naval form. It boasted impressive evasion, perfect for slipping past fists or deflecting sword blows, but paper alone couldn't stop a hail of bullets or Admiral Kizaru's laser beams. Only the overbearing style could withstand that kind of assault. If unlocking paper painting was enough to trigger the knowledge color, then surely activating Iron Block would meet the threshold for the armed color. After all, Iron Block had been eligible for activation ever since Nathan first analyzed its physical enhancements 2 months ago. Yet he'd never spent his free talent point on it. Frankly, it had always felt more trouble than it was worth. Now, with exactly 1 unspent talent point remaining, Nathan faced 3 choices. 1. Unlock Overbearing Style. 2. Activate Iron Block and gain the armed color. 3. Finally spend the point on Moonstep. A tense moment passed as he weighed each option, knowing this decision could shape his future in ways he'd scarcely imagined. Nathan frowned as he stared at the 3 upgrade options blinking on the screen. Strengthen his physique? Hone his elemental affinity? Or unlock a new combat technique? Each choice carried its own promise, but he hesitated. Why rush when he could build a solid foundation first? With a decisive click, Nathan chose physical fitness enhancement. After all, beefing up his body was the most universally useful upgrade, one that could never go to waste. He opened the talent menu and poured 50 points into physical fitness enhancement, boosting its proficiency from 100 to 150. Immediately, a wave of warmth flooded through him. It started in his chest, rushed down through his legs, and then radiated outward until it settled, leaving his muscles tingling with renewed strength. Nathan looked down at his forearm and gave it a tentative flex. Even without a major transformation, he murmured, a 50-point boost already feels significant. Encouraged, He switched over to the Combat Skills tab. Everything else looked unchanged. Heavy Strike was still shaded gray, indicating it remained locked, and the Moonstep maneuver from the 6th Naval Style was likewise inactive. For now, at least, his offensive arsenal hadn't expanded, but Nethan was content. He knew a stronger body would only make future breakthroughs that much easier. Nethan stared at the 60 remaining talent proficiency points floating before him. If he poured all of them into his devil fruit, his body, already honed to withstand extraordinary strain, could easily handle the extra load, and the fruit's powers would surge to a whole new level. On the other hand, his basic physical fitness stat had just reached 150 points. Allocating 50 more would catapult him into the peak physical fitness tier, sending his raw strength through the roof. With that kind of boost, both his armament hockey and his moonstep technique would become reliably triggerable in battle. Raw firepower or greater endurance and agility? Nethan hesitated. Here in the West Blue, his current abilities were more than enough to keep most opponents at bay, unless he ran into someone like Qingjiao, a veteran commander fresh from the Grand Line. And even a several times increase in power still mightn't suffice against a powerhouse like Green Pepper, the infamous leader who once placed a 500 million belli bounty on his head. After weighing the risks and rewards, Nethan made his choice. Nethan focused for a moment, then allocated 10 talent points to the corrupted fruit and another 50 to physical enhancement. Instantly, the physical enhancement bar snapped from 150 all the way up to its maximum threshold. The word top, once dim gray, flashed gold beneath the gauge. A fierce surge of energy exploded from Nethan's heart, radiating through every fiber of his body. He could almost hear his cells crying out with longing as they greedily absorbed the strange power. Time seemed to stretch and contract, what felt like both an eternity and a single instant, before the torrent of energy began to ebb. Even as the flow slowed, each cell continued to tremble, desperately drawing in the final threads of power until at last the internal storm quieted. Nethan's muscles settled, and a profound stillness washed over him. He opened his eyes to the unmistakable truth. His physical strength had skyrocketed. The leap from advanced to top was clear, and he could already feel the difference in every sinew and joint. This refinement of his body would transform everything that lay ahead. Nethan's body hadn't exactly doubled in strength, but it had increased by at least 60 to 70%. Factoring in how the system converts raw physical power into usable combat ability, his top-tier fitness was now effectively 3 times greater than his previous advanced level, and could even be pushed to 5 times under optimal conditions. Add in the steady gains he'd made over the last 2 months of non-stop training, and he was finally strong enough to go toe-to-toe with Major General Bastius, using nothing more than his own physical prowess. Relaxing his tense muscles, Nethan switched his view back to the battle department's talent interface. Everything looked brand new. Talents that had once been grayed out were now glowing emerald green. All 6 naval combat styles were unlocked. The Domineering series, Basic Domineering, Armed Domineering, even Overlord's Domineering, shone brightly in his list of options. He paused, scanning the array of flashy skills. It was tempting, but Nethan was a pragmatist. Showy abilities could wait. For now, he needed only what was truly useful. Let the others admire the spectacle. He'd invest his points where they counted most. Armed Domineering might just have to wait. Nethan stared at the emerald green armed domination skill shimmering before him. The urge to unleash its power was almost overwhelming. After all, in this world, simply having domination and choosing not to use it were 2 entirely different things. Yet today he'd made his choice. He would rely on the Moonstep. With the Moonstep, he could already run rampant across the western seas. Even if he activated armed domination now, it would be little more than a bonus. He still couldn't hope to overcome a threat like Pirate Lord Green Pepper. But the Moonstep enabled him to handle virtually any situation, striking from sea, land, or air, evading entire fleets of warships, even dropping down from the sky to board and sink an enemy vessel in a single bound. So far, he'd never hunted pirates carrying bounties over 50 million Baileys, but that was about to change. Once he acquired his next ship and brought down the Twin Blade pirates, the #1 wanted outlaws of the West Sea, he would earn a free talent point. Then, and only then, could he activate his emerald arm domination at full strength. That would mark the true beginning of his grand march to domination. Chapter 28, Pirate Port. Nethan couldn't shake his curiosity about the innate talent he'd just unlocked, Moonstep. According to the talent interface, new abilities require both mental imprinting and rigorous physical reinforcement. Yet Nethan possessed a peculiar quirk. He disliked holding back. Eager to test his limits, he slipped open the hatch and climbed onto the corridor's railing. From her seat at a deckside table, Robin glanced up from her book. When Nethan gave no orders or warning, she turned back to her reading, only to see him vault into the air, leaping effortlessly toward the cabin's peak. He didn't pause there. Instead, he planted his foot midair as though treading on solid ground, producing a sharp, echoing crack. Again and again, tang! Tang! He ascended, each invisible step propelling him higher, rapidly closing the distance between himself and the ship's towering sail. Robin stared, blinking. Nethan soared upward like a man walking an unseen staircase, the wind rushing past him as he climbed ever closer to the crow's nest. Whatever Moonstep was meant to be, it was far more astonishing in practice than in theory. Though each bound lifted him only a few feet, after a dozen or so, Nethan had shrunk to a tiny black speck against the sky. "Is that a Moonstep?" Robin whispered, astonished. She'd heard that Nethan had mastered the Sixth Fleet's wind shave and paper painting techniques, but she'd never actually seen him perform the Moonstep, nor did she know where he might have learned so rare a skill. Even among the elite recruits trained at naval headquarters, only a handful attempted the Moonstep. Its difficulty dwarfed that of windshave. Without pausing for breath, Nethan launched into 20 more leaps, finally coming to rest some 30 or 40 meters from the ship's railing. A sharp numbness prickled through his calves and ankles, and he let out a low sigh as he eased to the deck. Closing his eyes, he reflected on the secret behind the Moonstep. It wasn't about conjuring an invisible platform beneath you, but about slamming and compressing the air with such raw force and lightning speed that it could bear your weight. The maneuver demanded not only staggering power, but pinpoint control. One misstep in the air, and you'd lose your footing entirely. Nethan flexed his toes, the cool deck reassuring under his boots. He'd pulled it off this time. But he knew mastering the Moonstep was only the beginning. Nethan sprang from the deck. His first bound launched him over 10 meters into the air. But when he tried to treat thin air as solid ground and push himself higher, he strained to eke out even a single extra meter. Without the buffs granted by his talent system, so far only memory implants and enhanced strength, he wouldn't have even reached this height. Still, he managed to hover about 50 meters above the sea. From up here, cool salt spray kissed his face. He squinted toward the horizon, catching sight of a distant speck of green. Flower Island? If it was already visible at this range, then it couldn't be too far away. Satisfied, Nethan dove back toward the ship. He hit the cabin's slanted roof harder than intended. Timber cracked beneath him, a jagged line spidering out from where he landed. He coughed, steadying himself. That was too rough. He'd need to learn finer control over his power before he risked another ascent. But the view, even a few seconds aloft, had been worth it. He tapped his chin, already plotting his next jump. Nethan's lip twitched as he glanced to his left and caught Robin's startled gaze. She quickly looked away, feigning indifference as she returned to her book. With a silent nod, Nethan dropped down from the cabin roof and summoned the deckhands to begin repairs. Once on deck, he took 2 deep breaths and launched into the Moonstep again. This Yubu technique, meant to strengthen one's body through graceful, weightless leaps, doubled as perfect exercise. His physique was still in flux. Too heavy a ship deck would shudder beneath him, while anything too light wouldn't offer enough resistance. But Yubu required no extra weights, relying solely on his own physical power and balance. The crew watched in awe as he seemed to float into the air, their initial shock giving way to admiration. No one dared slack off. They set to work immediately, plank by plank, restoring the cabin to its former state. Welcome to the land of flowers, a pirate nation where every breeze carries the promise of danger and every port hides a new adventure. Since the Kingdom of Floralia holds a seat at the World Conference, the Navy seldom patrols its waters. Word of this has spread throughout the West Sea, and pirates have flocked here in droves, yet none dare challenge the fragile peace of the Flower Kingdom. At the heart of their caution lies Ironhead Qingjiao, the fearsome captain of the 8 Treasures Corsairs. With a 500 million belli bounty on his head, he once roamed the Grand Line and even bounced Admiral Garp's punches right off his skull without so much as a scratch. Rumor says he and his lieutenants wield the legendary 8 punches, a form of hockey so powerful it can bend steel and shatter bones. More than 1,000 corsairs swear fealty to him. Their presence alone is enough to keep Floralia's order intact. Nethin watched the harbor grow larger on the horizon. His ship eased into the bay, and sure enough, the dock was crowded with pirate vessels. Dozens of hulls tied stern to stern, each bearing a different flag, each flying its colors without shame. It was exactly as the intel had described, a pirate haven under the unspoken protection of Ironhead Qingjiao and his 8 Treasures Corsairs. Here, in the heart of the Flower Kingdom, law was enforced not by the world government's bluejackets, but by the iron fist of its most dreaded outlaws. Nethin stood on deck, watching the harbor of the Land of Flowers teem with pirate vessels flying skull and crossbones flags. Robin's face remained composed, though a note of surprise crept into her voice. Beside her, Rhodes leaned casually against the rail, smiling as he took in the scene. "You rarely see ports like this back in the West Blue," he observed, his gaze drifting over the crowded pier. "But along the Grand Line, pirate havens are a dime a dozen. Captain, have you ever sailed that route before?" Robin turned to Nethin, arching an eyebrow. His calm response hinted at intimate knowledge, as if he'd navigated those waters himself. Nethin touched his chin thoughtfully. "I have." Their ship glided in, and every eye on the waterfront instantly trained on the black-hulled vessel. The reputation of the Ghost Hand pirates was well known across the West Blue. Dockworkers paused in mid-task, and crews on neighboring ships dropped anchor lines to stare. "Look, it's the Ghost Hand flagship. They say Rhodes took down a Navy rear admiral not long ago. 64 million berries bounty. That's 5 million more than the Twin Swords." Whispers rippled along the docks as their vessel settled alongside the quay. The Ghost Hand pirates had arrived, and the port of Flores would not soon forget it. Chapter 12. Headlines blared across every tavern and port bulletin. Ghost Hand pirates ambush Navy convoy. Vice Admiral slain. 64,000 berry bounty on pirate Captain Nethin. Out by the quayside, a handful of men in crisp uniforms, known on the surface as the Navy, but whispered among sailors as the Flower Kingdom's sanctioned privateers, the 8 Treasures Marine Corps, clustered around a scarred wooden table. Empty mugs littered the boards. A half-smoked cigarette smoldered between 2 of them. "They're twisting the story in the papers," growled Vance, rolling up yesterday's newspaper. "They claim Ghost Hand Rhodes ambushed the Navy just to scare civilians. Who in their right mind would attack us for no reason?" Maya, one of his comrades, exhaled a plume of smoke. "It's obvious, isn't it? The Navy stirred it up to justify chasing Nethin, but his power turned the tables. He cut down that rear admiral outright." She tapped the bounty poster stuck to the mast across the docks. 64 million berries. They didn't pick that number out of thin air. Vance grinned. A fitting price for the man who dismantled a vice admiral without breaking a sweat. He glanced seaward. "And look who's coming in now." Through the morning mist, the Ghost Hand pirates' black-flagged frigate slipped past the breakwater. Its canvas sails, though torn in places, billowed defiantly. Most notably, the bounty notice, proclaiming "Wanted, Captain Nethin, 64,000th in berries," still fluttered from the highest yardarm like a gauntlet thrown. Maya lifted her wineglass. "On the surface, we're the Navy's first line of defense. But between us," she winked, "we're every bit as rogue as the Ghost Hand crew." Vance clinked his mug against hers. "Then let's welcome them properly. Today's going to be one for the history books." As the pirate ship docked, a hush fell over the 8 Treasures Marines. They straightened their uniforms, took deep pulls from their cigarettes, and readied themselves for the heavyweight clash that the world's newspapers would soon dissect, and inevitably misunderstand. Even pirates flaunting bounties in the tens of octillions can't hope to hide along the grand shipping route once they've earned the wrath of the 8 treasures marines. Chapter 29, The Treasure Tree. Adam, hold the line here and guard the ship, Nathan instructed his handful of deckhands as the ghost hand pirate flag whipped in the breeze. The vessel's hull bumped against the dock, and without hesitation, Nathan led Robin ashore under the watchful eyes of the port's laborers. No one dared interfere. Rumor of the ghost hand cruise was enough to keep trouble at bay. They stepped from the pier into the bustling streets of Flower Country. Despite its pirate heritage, this island was nothing like Hancock's Nine Snake Island. Here the people made their living not by raiding merchant vessels, but by trading timber. Flower Country was famed across the West Sea for its vast lumber yards, and every street teemed with workers lugging square-cut logs in every hue of brown and ochre. Nathan paused at the edge of a crowd, watching sweaty porters hoist hefty planks onto waiting barges. He spotted a broad-shouldered laborer in a faded short-sleeved tunic and approached him. With a quick flick of his wrist, he flipped a silver coin that gleamed in the sun and landed neatly in the man's waiting palm. The laborer's eyes met Nathan's, and he nodded. "You're looking for the shipwright's yard, isn't that right? Head down this road, take the second alley on your left. Can't miss it." Nathan gave a curt thanks and motioned to Robin. Together, they pushed through the milling crowd, deeper into Flower Country's wooden heart, in search of the legendary treasure tree Adam. Nathan casually holstered his pistol and sheathed the slender sword at his hip, then flipped a silver coin across the gap between them. The handyman, clad in a simple short-sleeved tunic, jumped as the coin clinked onto the wooden desk. But the instant he recognized its worth, his eyes brightened. "The boat and timber market's over on the south bank," he blurted out, voice a mixture of relief and excitement. "All the wood for the houses comes through there." Nathan gave a curt nod, pocketed his hands, and motioned for Robin to follow. Together, they slipped out of the workshop and headed south. The streets of the Land of Flowers pulsed with activity. Though pirates weren't literally around every corner, it wasn't unusual to see townsfolk casually carrying pistols or blades at their sides. Street brawls did erupt from time to time, but the Flower Country guards intervened swiftly, escorting quarrelsomes to a nearby plaza where they could settle scores, just so long as they didn't wreak havoc in residential districts. In this realm, even foreign freebooters were tolerated so long as they kept their swords sheathed. Robin strolled beside Nathan, taking in the bustle of vendors unloading timber and merchants haggling over shiploads of lumber. "It really is a timber trading hub," he remarked thoughtfully. "Every dock, every skiff, everything's here to feed the building boom." Nathan grunted in agreement, eyes fixed on the harbor ahead. The south bank lay just beyond the next curve, a tangle of piers, barges, and stacked planks of every imaginable size. Here the scent of fresh-cut wood mixed with salt spray and the promise of honest work or trouble hung in the air. As they quickened their pace toward the docks, Nathan allowed himself the barest of smiles. In the Land of Flowers, opportunity bloomed like, flowers, and he intended to gather his share. Nathan watched the waterfront with a faint, mocking smile. "You see all those pirates lining up to trade for boat timber? Ordinary city guards wouldn't stand a chance against them, but if the government actually organized a proper naval force..." He let the thought trail off, shaking his head. "They won't. The world's sick, and both government and navy would rather look the other way. Their job is to maintain order, not to deliver justice. And order and justice are two very different things." Robin, known among the seafaring underworld as the Devil's Son, walked silently at Nathan's side. Though many pirates recognized Robin's fearsome pedigree, it was Nathan who drew their true dread. No one with any sense dared challenge them. Rumor had it that wherever the ghost hand Nathan appeared, pirates or navy alike, they were cut down without mercy. In the West Sea, his name was among the most dreaded. Before long, they left the rickety shacks of the West Bank behind and stepped onto the South Bank. In an instant, the atmosphere changed. Here the docks were orderly and well kept, and the distant cries of laborers mingled with the steady clang of hammers on wood. Nathan inhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. This place might look tidy, but he knew that beneath the polished surface, corruption could run just as deep. Together, he and Robin pressed on, ready to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden in the South Bank's bustling harbor. Chapter 9. The Timber Yard. A vast sea of timber filled the yard, massive logs stacked so high that no ordinary group of laborers could hope to lift them. Scores of men worked in teams, sliding the heaviest trunks onto wheeled trolleys. With synchronized effort and a few creaking ropes, they guided the loads toward the docks, where small boats waited to carry the wood out to sea. At the center of this bustle stood Nethin, once feared as Ghost Hand Rhodes among the pirate fleets. Even here, at the edge of the pirate haven, his reputation preceded him. As soon as he stepped forward, a dozen burly wood haulers froze mid-stride. Pirates unloading ships ducked behind crates and barrels, eyeing Nethin warily. No one wanted to be on the wrong end of a surprise attack from the man who'd bested the infamous pirate navy. Watching from the edge of the crowd, Nethin's companion Robin strode confidently forward. Robin was well-versed in maritime affairs, everything from rigging to hull design, so it was no surprise when a diminutive, hunchbacked old man edged out to greet them. "You two looking for boat timber?" the man rasped, his gait cautious but eager. "I've got keel planks, mast spars, any cut you need, straight from the finest forests." Nethin inclined his head. "Show us what you have." The old man led them toward a trio of colossal logs laid out on the sand. He tapped a rich reddish-brown trunk first. "This is red oak, strong, holds its shape well under stress, good for the keel if you're after durability." He pointed to a darker log crusted with knots and small thorns embedded in the bark. "That one's thornwood, tough as nails, resistant to marine worms. Hard to work, but it'll last longer than most." Finally, he nodded at a pale, yellowish beam. "Iron sandalwood. Doesn't absorb water, so it won't swell or warp. Perfect for fast vessels that slice through the waves. You want to shave every ounce of drag." Robin studied the iron sandalwood thoughtfully. "For a ship built for speed, that sounds ideal. How does it handle under sail, though? We don't want a brittle mast that'll snap in a stiff breeze." The hunchback cracked a toothy grin. "Iron sandalwood bends before it breaks. Just don't push it past its limits. You'll pay more for it, but once it's seasoned and planed, you'll shave days off your passage times." Nethin exchanged a look with Robin. The pirates still lingered at the edge of the yard, curiosity outweighing their fear. Nethin's calm confidence sent a clear message. He was here to trade, not to terrify, at least for now. "We'll take 10 lengths of iron sandalwood for the hull planking," Robin decided, "and 8 more for the masts." The old man's face lit up. "Good choice. I'll have my best sawyers cut and dress them by sundown. You won't find better anywhere along this coast." As the hunchback bustled off to arrange their order, Nethin and Robin strolled toward the water's edge. The pirates watched them go in respectful silence. Even the fiercest cutthroats understood one thing. When the Ghost Hand Rhodes and his ally came calling, business came first, and nobody dared stand in their way. Nethin surveyed the massive logs piled before him and asked casually, "Which of these would you recommend for a fast ship?" The hunchbacked old man didn't hesitate. "If speed's your priority, use iron, pear for the keel. It's incredibly light. As for the mast, iron sandalwood will stand up to the fiercest gales." Nethin paused to glance at Robin, who watched the exchange with keen interest. "And for a vessel about 40 meters long?" he pressed. The old man laughed, straightening his hunched shoulders. 40 meters? Perfect. I just took delivery of several logs that size, and I'm practically giving them away. Keel and mast together. 9 million Baileys. Want to take a look?" 9 million? Nethin echoed, taken aback. The old man waved a gnarled hand, cheeks reddening. "I swear that's a bargain. No, too cheap even. I must have underpriced them." Nethin nodded slowly, one hand on his chin. After a moment he asked, "Do you happen to have any Baoshu Atom among these timbers?" At the name, the old man's eyes brightened. "Now you're talking about a treasure. Come with me. I'll show you exactly what I've got." All the world's finest ship timber, like the legendary Wanli Sunshine used by Straw Hat Luffy, comes from Atom wood. Renowned for its lightning speed and unbreakable resilience, it's the ultimate prize for any shipwright. The old hunchback dealer paused mid-sip, his mind racing as he decided what to recommend to Nethin. Then Nethin spoke so matter-of-factly that the dealer nearly spat out his drink. "Atom wood?" The dealer choked. "Do you know how expensive that stuff is? And you're just asking if I have it?" Nethan met his gaze coolly. The dealer scratched his head, hesitated, and finally confessed, "I don't keep any raw atom wood on hand. But, just recently, a 41-meter branch arrived for auction across town. Only the wealthiest can afford to bid. You'll need at least 100 million Baileys just to get in the running." He muttered under his breath, certain Nethan would turn away, then shuffled off when Nethan remained silent. Nethan turned to Robin with a self-satisfied smile. "I can't believe we actually found a branch of atom wood." Nethan inspected the crate with a critical eye. "The fit is perfect," he admitted, "but we might be a little short on funds." Robin, the expedition's archaeologist, nodded. She'd heard of the fabled atom wood, a legendary timber prized for its near-unbreakable strength, and knew exactly how valuable it could be. Nethan offered her a reassuring grin and shook his head. "Don't worry, we'll scrape together enough. Pirates are everywhere, and we still have 2 days before the auction. Let's track down the White Bear pirates first, before anyone else does." Chapter 30. The White Bear Pirates. A month ago, the naval T4 branch base found itself without a commanding officer. Colonel Bastius had fallen at the hands of Rhodes in the kingdom of Simoner, and for weeks a lone colonel held the fort, until a warship from Navy headquarters sailed in and relieved him. On board was Major General Nethan, known by his call sign Ghost Spider. Although it's customary for a headquarters general to assume the branch's lieutenant generalcy, Nethan's assignment was different. He was here solely to hunt down the elusive Ghost Hand Rhodes, a special operation, not a promotion. Now in the base command office, Major General Nethan leaned back in his leather chair, leafing through a stack of reports. The routine paperwork barely slowed him. His sharp mind already traced possible leads to Rhodes's trail. He paused, pen hovering over a document, when the phone on his mahogany desk buzzed into life. Nethan picked up. "Base Command," Nethan speaking. On the other end, a sharp voice reported, "Sir, we've intercepted a coded transmission from a vessel calling itself the White Bear. They left port 3 days ago and are heading due north along the eastern meridian." Nethan's eyes narrowed. The White Bear pirates were notorious for raiding merchant convoys and vanishing without a trace. If they'd crossed paths with Rhodes, well, that could explain the uptick in intercepted messages. "Patch me the details," he ordered. As the assistant relayed coordinates and decrypted snippets, Nethan stood and began striding toward the wall-mounted map. His fingers traced the pirates' projected route, a remote archipelago riddled with hidden coves, perfect cover for a rendezvous with someone like Rhodes. "Prepare a reconnaissance team," Nethan said without hesitation. "I want drones in the air within the hour, and have the ship's boats fueled and loaded. We move fast and quiet." "As you wish, sir," the aide replied, hastening to his tasks. Nethan studied the map. Intelligence suggested the White Bear's captain, a hulking brute called Bloodpaw, kept his prize cargo locked below deck. If Rhodes was aboard, he'd be the prize of all prizes, and the biggest threat the Navy had faced in years. He straightened his uniform, smoothing the insignia on his chest. This was no simple pirate skirmish. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse at the edge of the sovereign sea. And Nethan, the Ghost Spider, intended to ensnare Rhodes once and for all. With a final glance at the plotted course, he moved to the door. "Let's set sail. The chase begins now." Outside, the T4 dock shone in the midday sun as crewmen prepared the patrol boats. Above them, a squadron of reconnaissance drones hummed to life. The hunt for the White Bear pirates and their mysterious passenger was underway. "Sir, our branch scout has traced Ghost Hand Rhodes's trail all the way to the Land of Flowers. What are your orders?" At the mention of Ghost Hand Rhodes, Major General Ghost Spider's calm facade snapped into focus. He swept the report aside, unrolled the chart, and located the Land of Flowers. It lay at least 3 days' march from the T4 branch base. The only naval detachment capable of reaching it in a single day was stationed at the nearby town, hardly enough to challenge the notorious Ghost Hand pirates. Raising and deploying a force sizable enough to encircle and crush them would take far too long. And as Ghost Spider well knew, the Land of Flowers is no ordinary frontier. It's a labyrinthine den of vice and danger. After a heartbeat's hesitation, he spoke into the handset. "Hold your position. No rash moves. I want eyes on every approach. Quietly." He ended the call, paced his cramped office, and closed his eyes. His mind raced through possibilities. Patrol routes, informants, covert signals. Minutes passed before a spark of inspiration lit his features. The Land of Flowers. A city of neon lights and velvet drapes, where silk-clad nobles sip champagne beside dockside scoundrels. Glittering theaters, opulent casinos, and back-alley taverns spill into one another, each drawing in wealthy thrill-seekers, and the ferocious pirate crews eager to prey on them. It was a perfect hunting ground for ghost-hand roads, and a deadly trap for anyone who underestimated it. Up on the third-floor bar, the mood was a world away from the chaos below. At the center of the room, scantily clad dancers swayed their hips to the beat, while patrons in the outer ring leaned in close, champagne flutes in hand. Then the door hissed open, admitting a young man in a fur-trimmed hat, trailed by a girl whose dark hair fell from beneath a black shawl. Amid the roar of laughter and clinking glass, Nethan and Robin slipped in without drawing a second glance. Nethan's eyes swept over the room before he strolled to a quiet corner and settled into a vacant seat. Robin came to rest at his side, her gaze sharp as she scanned the crowd. Leaning in, she murmured, "Almost everyone is here." Nethan gave a curt nod but made no move to hurry. A waiter materialized with a flute of champagne, which Nethan accepted, raising it to his lips in a leisurely sip. Robin said nothing. She knew her role, and patience was part of it. After 2 more deliberate sips, Nethan set the glass on the low table beside him, alert and ready for what would happen next. Nethan was just about to rise when a rough-looking drunk leaned in, the sour tang of alcohol on his breath, and fixed Robin with a leering grin. "Hey, kid, your girlfriend's a fine piece," he slurred. "How about lending her out for a bit of fun?" In a tavern full of women well into their 20s, 17-year-old Robin did stand out, but she didn't flinch. She remained poised behind Nethan, her calm face belying the spark of danger flashing in her eyes. Nethan stayed seated, head bowed beneath his hat. With barely a shift of his lips, he spat one icy word at the drunk. "What?" The pirate froze, confusion and hurt pride crossing his face. He leaned closer, squinting to get a better look at Nethan. "You've got some nerve," he growled. "I'm with the White Bear Pirates. You." His words trailed off as Nethan tilted his hat, revealing eyes cold as steel. The man's grin vanished. Nethan's gaze bored into him, calm but unmistakably dangerous. Finally, Nethan finished the pirate's sentence for him. You're with the White Bear Pirates, too." A hush fell over the corner of the tavern. The drunk pirate's bravado drained away as he realized he'd picked on one of his own. Nethan's pistol cracked, and the pirate who'd been drowning in rum jolted fully awake. Recognition, laced with terror, flickered across his features. A member of the White Bear Pirates, he hated to admit it, but he'd never bothered to memorize the bounty list. And yet here stood before him the infamous Ghost Hand, ranked #1 in the West Sea. His knees went weak. He tried to swivel around, to warn his captain, but found himself frozen in place. "I was going to," he stammered. Slowly, Nethan rose to his feet. His hand dipped to his hip and re-emerged clutching a sleek, black pistol. He leveled it at the pirate's forehead. With a single thunderous report, the shot rang out. Silence swallowed the taproom, only to be shattered moments later by pandemonium. Tables crashed as sailors scrambled for cover. On the far side of the hall, the White Bear Pirate's captain wheeled around at the sound, eyes widening as he saw one of his men slump to the floor. And standing over him, cold and unflinching, was Nethan. Outside on the street, passers-by stopped dead in their tracks. The crack of a gunshot from the bar's 3rd floor echoed through the night, leaving everyone who heard it with pounding hearts and racing thoughts. Most people on the street glanced up at the bar's 3rd floor without really thinking about it. A moment later, they recoiled in shock as a crowd of patrons surged out onto the sidewalk in a blind panic. Gunshots? What was going on? Which pirate was causing this chaos? Before anyone could answer, the distant patrol officers also reacted to the sharp crack of gunfire. Then, with an ear-splitting crash, the entire 3rd-floor wall of the bar exploded outward. Dust and debris rained down, and through the wreckage flew a single figure. Boom! He hit the pavement in a horrific heap. As the dust cleared, bystanders saw it wasn't entirely human. The creature had a man's head perched on the body of a bear. Its massive claws were grotesquely twisted and broken, and its snarling expression was frozen in agony. The crowd gasped and instinctively backed away, pressing against the buildings on either side of the street. Dozens of astonished eyes fixed on the fallen figure. "Is that the captain of the White Bear Pirates?" someone whispered, voice trembling. "A bounty of 45 million berries," another added in disbelief. "How could anyone beat a bounty that high, let alone leave him like this?" Sirens wailed in the distance as the stunned onlookers stared at the ruined husk of the fearsome pirate captain, struggling to comprehend how so powerful a figure could be so utterly defeated. Just as the onlookers recoiled in horror, a lone figure dropped from the bar's upper balcony and landed squarely on the recovering white bear. A brutal cough tore from the beast's throat, and blood spattered across the floor. In an instant, the white fur receded, revealing a middle-aged man in a worn pirate's jacket. "Damn you!" the newly human pirate snarled, eyes wild with rage. Instead of begging for mercy, he fumbled at his hip, yanking out a pistol and firing at Nethan. Nethan remained perfectly calm. He shifted his weight, then brought his heel slamming down. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession. The pirate's chest caved in, crimson streaks blooming across his shirt. The pistol clattered from his hand as he crumpled to the floor. A stunned silence fell over the bar. Patrons froze, unable to process that the infamous captain of the White Bear Pirates lay defeated so swiftly. Nethan stepped off the fallen pirate, his boots slick with blood. Whispers swept through the crowd. "That's Ghost Hand Rhodes, isn't it?" The towering pirate captain Bai Xiong, wanted for 45 million belly and feared for his animal-type devil fruit power, lay defeated and humiliated at Nethan's feet. By all appearances, Nethan hadn't even broken a sweat. Spectators everywhere, whether the refined gentlemen of Flowerland or the roughneck sailors who'd come ashore for a drink, staggered back, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. Chapter 31. Clear the way! What's going on here? The Flower Country patrol guards surged onto the street, halting in unison at the sight before them. A body sprawled across the cobblestones and a lone young man in a leather cap standing over it. Ghost Hand Nethan. At first glance, the corpse looked horribly distorted, but a closer inspection revealed it was the captain of the White Bear Pirates. Had Nethan really confronted and defeated one of the White Bears? The patrol captain's face went pale. The White Bear Pirates weren't low-level ruffians. This was well beyond his authority. If any nobles or civilians had been caught in the crossfire, he'd be in serious trouble. He barked orders to secure the perimeter and questioned every witness in sight. An hour later, the captain let out a cautious sigh. His worst fears hadn't come true. No nobles or bystanders were harmed. Relief flooded through him. "Remember," he told his men, "there's an absolute ban on violence in the entertainment district, and that rule applies throughout the Flower Country. It's meant to protect our citizens and the nobility." He paused, eyes drifting back to Nethan, who stood motionless under the lantern light. The young man's calm, unreadable expression spoke volumes. This was no ordinary street scuffle, and Ghost Hand Nethan was anything but ordinary. As the last echoes of chaos faded on Entertainment Street, Rhodes and Robin slipped away into the shadows. Overnight, tales of Rhodes's confrontation with the Phantom Hand and the shocking slaying of Captain Whitebear became the hottest gossip around every lantern-lit alley. Meanwhile, aboard the captured flagship, Nethan stared at the system interface hovering in front of him. Plus 15 talent proficiency points. He had no intention of banking them. With a decisive click, he funneled all 15 points into his Twisted Fruit ability, boosting its proficiency from 175 to a solid 190. The skill's area of effect expanded dramatically, and thanks to Nethan's peak physical conditioning, the surge in power posed no threat. In fact, he could probably push it up beyond 234 points, though at that level, his body would truly begin to strain. The spoils left by the defeated White Bear Pirates were staggering, more than 30 million Baileys in gold, gems, and priceless artifacts. Every last coin, and even the pirate ship itself, now belonged to Nethan. As he surveyed his newfound fortune, it was clear this haul would change everything. Robin stared at the open chest piled high with coins and bills. This must be the White Bear Pirates' entire haul, all brought here to the Land of Flowers. Nethan nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. And they've already converted everything. Gold, silver, jewels, into Baileys, No need to hunt down exchange agents. He glanced at the tally, well over 120 million Baileys. Still, even this much won't quite cover the cost of Adam's treasure tree cuttings. He knew, as Robin did, how astronomically valuable those branches were. With a decisive gesture, Nethan heaved the chest into the ship's cabin. "This'll do for now. We're not about to start robbing civilians. Plundering pirates is more our style, and if we ever need more, we just find another gang to teach a lesson." True to his word, in the next day and a half, Nethan unleashed a brutal campaign across the Land of Flowers. 6 major pirate crews were utterly wiped out, and dozens of smaller bands scattered or surrendered. By the time the dust settled, the once lawless seas around the islands were running dry of marauders. Robin watched the aftermath with a mixture of awe and satisfaction. That should clear the way for us. Nethan's grin was all assurance. Now, back to Adam's tree. Nethan hadn't set out to slaughter so mercilessly. His original goal was simply to break up the 3 pirate bands who had been terrorizing the coast. But when he wiped those crews out, a few survivors slipped away, allying themselves with other pirate factions. Together, they spread word that Nethan planned to butcher every last seafaring soul, an alarmist rumor that rallied dozens of pirate ships under a single banner. Their combined bounties totaled 20 to 30 million Bailey. But to Nethan and his companion Robin, massed enemies meant little. They laughed at the numbers and prepared to strike. At dawn, Nethan led the assault from the shoreline. With calculated precision, he sank 2 pirate vessels before they could even hoist their colors. Arrows and cannon fire raked the decks. Boarding parties were cut down mercilessly. By midday, the water around the coast ran a deep, pulsing red. The newly assembled pirate alliance, once confident in its strength, fractured under Nethan's onslaught. Those who hadn't been slaughtered fled in terror, their ships floating wrecks in their wake. News of the carnage spread swiftly, reaching the ears of the Kingdom of Flowers Naval Command. Tension crackled in the port cities. Was the Crown's military about to intervene? In the end, the kingdom chose to observe from afar. Officially, they claimed Nethan's actions fell outside their jurisdiction. Unofficially, few dared challenge the man who had carved his name into pirate lore. When the smoke cleared, Nethan and Robin stood victorious on that blood-stained shore. They recovered nearly 300 million Bailey from the wrecks and hideouts of the defeated pirates. More than gold, though, Nethan claimed a new sense of mastery. His talents had sharpened through the battle, and he felt 25 steps closer to the legend he was becoming. Nethan didn't hesitate when it came to distributing his 25 new talent points. He poured every single one into his Twisted Fruit ability, lifting its proficiency level to 215. Now that his physical strength had reached a peak, reinforcing his Devil Fruit power was the smartest move. Those extra points drastically sharpened his control and output. As he stood in his ship's cabin, Nethan realized the true extent of his boosted ability. If he applied his twisting power to the hull, he could envelop the entire vessel in a distorting field. In a confrontation with a warship, all it would take was a moonstep to drop in from above and reduce the enemy vessel to a mangled wreck in seconds. At this level, even portable cannons, or the heavy guns mounted on pirate ships, would barely scratch his defenses. Only siege-class artillery would pose a real threat. With his Devil Fruit power and raw strength finally in balance, Nethan knew exactly what he had to do next: bolster his agility. The faster he became, the harder it would be for any opponent, no matter how heavily armed, to land a decisive blow. Nethan felt the twisting power coil through his veins, a living force that set every muscle alight. If he unleashed it fully, even 2 or 3 Bastius-level major generals combined wouldn't stand a chance. True, an opponent with strong Domineer cultivation could challenge him, but so long as their Domineer rank remained low, he could absorb or deflect their oppressive aura with his twisting power. And in pure speed and agility, he still outpaced Bastius himself. Speed had once been his greatest asset. Lately, though, his raw strength and fruit ability had surged so rapidly that his quickness lagged behind, turning what was once a blessing into a new vulnerability. Against a foe who specialized in velocity or a cunning tactician who exploited every opening, he could find himself trapped in a tangled, drawn-out contest. A gentle knock at the door pulled Nethan from his thoughts. Robin stepped inside the dimly lit room. "Captain, the auction starts in an hour," he reminded him. Over the past days, Robin had uncovered every detail about the auction of Adam's branches, the most coveted treasures of the tree. He paused, meeting Nethan's eyes. "We need to move soon if we want to secure them." Nethan nodded, letting the last of his doubts dissipate. The twisting power still hummed beneath his skin, ready when he was. Now it was time to put that power, and their careful planning, to the test. It was the final lot at the prize timber auction hosted by the Flower Realm. "Shall we?" Nethan said, turning to find Robin sprouting 4 extra arms, each one gripping a massive suitcase. He couldn't help but grin as he relieved her of 2. "Always considerate of your captain," he teased. Robin pursed her lips, her eyes dancing with amusement. After all their time together, she knew exactly when Nethan was in a playful mood. "I just thought a girl with 6 arms might steal all the attention," he complained, feigning a pout. At his words, Robin's extra limbs faded into a cascade of pink petals that scattered at their feet. She tipped her straw hat into place, and side by side, they strolled down to the shoreline, making their way toward the auction pavilion. Chapter 32. Auction. Every year, the Land of Flowers receives a shipment of rare timbers so valuable they can't be sold through ordinary channels. Instead, they're offered at a grand public auction held in the sprawling open-air lumberyard on the kingdom's south bank. When Nethan and Robin arrived just before sunrise, a bustling crowd had already gathered among the stacks of exotic woods. Merchants and nobles in finery, and even a handful of notorious pirates, all jockeying for position and casting eager glances at the prize specimens. Rows of planks and logs stretched as far as the eye could see, labeled in ornate scripts that proclaimed their origins: ebony from the Sunken Isles, rosewood from the Spice Coast, and lacquered pear from the Eastern Marches. But nothing drew more attention than the colossal segment of timber rising from the center of the lot, a single branch, nearly 40 meters long, harvested from the fabled Adam tree. Its surface gleamed with a natural polish, and legend held that its strength and flexibility outmatched ordinary steel. Nethan studied that massive limb with a pounding heart. In the old tales, those recounted by sailors and shipwrights, Adam wood had been prized to construct the decks of the Wanli Sunshine, one of the greatest vessels of the high seas. Could this be the very same timber? He forced himself to look away. 11 years had passed since the era of the great pirates dawned. Too much time and too many hands had surely crossed since then. Still, he tucked the thought away under a calm expression and stepped forward. The auction was about to begin, and he intended to see exactly how far a legend could stretch. Nethan withdrew his gaze and strolled to the edge of the platform, perching casually on its rim. In moments, the timber auction began. The host, a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit, stepped forward and unveiled the first lot, a 5 to 6 meter stake of deep red wood. It was crimson oak, its grain and hue fit for the finest tables, chairs, or even sofas. Though undeniably luxurious, Nethan felt no spark of interest. He leaned back and let a handful of nobles trade hesitant bids. 5 million Baileys. 5 million Baileys, twice. With a crisp rap of his gavel, the auctioneer announced, "Sold." No sooner had the second piece of rare wood been rolled out than the hours slipped by. Occasionally, a prized timber for shipbuilding, cherished boatwood, appeared on the rostrum, but even at their best, none of these logs measured up to the fabled branches of the Adam tree. Nethan cast each one only a passing glance before returning to his idle scrutiny of the crowd. After all, boat timber drew far fewer bidders than the woods fit for palatial furnishings. Most nobles simply had no use for it. Finally, the last lot of the day was presented. The wooden planks had been paraded across the auction grounds one by one, each more remarkable than the last. Now only one remained, a dark crimson slab that seemed to pulse with an ancient, time-worn energy. Among the spectators, Nethan's pulse quickened as he leaned forward. The auctioneer, a sharply dressed man who'd been speaking for hours, paused to catch his breath. Mustering his remaining strength, he swept his arm toward the final piece. "Behold the centerpiece of today's sale." His voice cracked with excitement. Legends tell of an island besieged by endless wars, peppered with bullets until every soul was lost and every city lay in ruins. Yet from that desolation rose a singular, magnificent tree. its trunk scarred, its branches unbroken. Only a handful of such trees exist worldwide, but the mightiest of them all is known as the Atom Treasure Tree. He took a breath, eyes burning as he looked over the crowd. And here, this crimson plank, is a branch torn from that very tree. Silence fell. The auctioneer's voice turned hoarse as he intoned, "Opening bid, 100 million Bailey." A murmur rippled through the hall, but no paddles rose. All eyes remained fixed on that ancient plank, and on the man who would dare to claim it. The auctioneer, in the sharp suit, shifted uneasily behind the podium, glancing at the crowd. He was growing concerned that Adam's branch of the treasure tree might go unsold. Finally, a voice rang out from the front row. 100 million Baileys. It came from a neatly dressed businessman with a perfectly groomed mustache. Just a starting bid. 110 million, came the answer, and the auction was on. Several merchants, sensing the rarity of the piece, raised their paddles. As the bids climbed, 120 million, 130 million, the room's tension ratcheted upward. At 150 million Baileys, a wave of hesitation swept through the hall. The price was already extraordinary, and the risk of a failed resale too great. A miscalculation now could mean a heavy loss. Then, cutting through the murmurs, came a firm, clear declaration. 200 million. Nethin's paddle shot up. The sudden leap from 150 to 200 million Baileys sent a shock through the assembled aristocratic traders. For many, such a sum was simply inconceivable, yet Nethin stood ready to claim the prize. At that moment, a band of pirates clustered near the auction platform caught wind of the bidding and stiffened. These scoundrels had been lurking in the shadows, desperate to snatch Adam's treasured tree branch once a wealthy buyer had secured it. But now someone was calling out surprisingly high bids from the podium. Curious, they turned their eyes and froze. "It's him," one pirate muttered. "Ghost Hand Rhodes." Their leader, Nithin, better known along the west coast as Ghost Hand Rhodes, strode forward, voice calm as he placed another bid. A ripple of dread passed through the would-be hijackers. They'd planned to rob merchants or nobles once a branch sold, but if Rhodes bought it outright, their chance vanished. "Rhodes? Seriously," hissed one pirate. "His name's stained with every drop of blood spilled around here. Who dare take him on, let alone rob him?" Meanwhile, the assorted nobles and wealthy traders in attendance frowned in surprise. They hadn't recognized Nethin at first, but whispers among their entourages made the truth clear. A pirate, one infamous enough to command a crew feared from here to the horizon, was bidding for the prize. Could a corsair really have deep enough pockets to outbid them all? Silence settled over the hall as Nethin raised his paddle again. The tension was palpable. Merchants, nobles, even pirates struggled to decide whether to join the bidding war or simply back away. In that moment, Ghost Hand Rhodes held all the cards. Nethin's heart pounded as the hammer hovered above the podium. 200 million Bailey, an astonishing sum, even for the notorious Ghost Hand Rhodes. The great pirate of the Western Sea, famed for his ruthlessness and cunning, was clearly weighing his options. Across the auction floor, the suited official overseeing the sale, representing the Land of Flowers prestigious auction house, with the Seven Treasures Navy as its guarantor, grew visibly tense. He had anticipated rough characters and bold bids, but 200 million was beyond expectation. Still, knowing the Navy's ironclad reputation enforced every transaction, he dared not intervene. Surrounding them, merchants and nobles murmured among themselves, casting curious glances. A handful of shadowy figures who had been watching since the start now turned their attention to Nethin. Their eyes narrowed as he raised his paddle for the Atom Treasure Tree branch. Then, as if by mutual unspoken agreement, they slipped back into the crowd and melted away, their interest gone as quickly as it had flared. 1, 2. Seconds ticked by in that cavernous hall, the only sound the low murmur of disbelief. Neither aristocrat nor trader dared challenge the bid. Rhodes, steely and inscrutable, met Nethin's gaze and hesitated. Going once, going twice, silence. Then the auctioneer's voice rang out, crisp and final. "Sold, 200 million Bailey to bidder number 617. A ripple of astonished gasps spread through the room. Nethin's grip loosened, adrenaline surging. He had won the prized branch of the treasure tree Atom, an object of untold mystery and value, against the deadliest pirate in the Western Sea. The game had only just begun. The suited man overseeing the auction glared at the crowd and banged his gavel again, but nobody dared challenge Rhodes. With a frustrated sigh, he let the hammer drop. Instantly, the auction master rushed forward, bowed deeply to Nethan, and said, "Sir, please come forward to settle your bid." Nethan rose calmly and followed him. Along the aisle, 7 treasure marines from the Flower Kingdom stood at attention, every one of them alert and disciplined in Nethan's presence. No one risked showing the slightest carelessness. 200 million berries, the auction master announced. At Rhodes's nod, Robin slipped off toward the back courtyard and returned a moment later with 3 heavy crates. She snapped open the lids, counted out stacks of bills with lightning speed, and piled exactly 200 million berries before the stunned auction master. He blinked in disbelief. He hadn't expected anyone to pay such an astronomical sum until he remembered the recent news. Nethan had single-handedly wiped out a pirate fleet not long ago. Of course he could afford it. With a bow, the auction master said, "All right, sir. With payment settled, the item is yours." Nethan merely inclined his head, watched Rhodes step forward to retrieve the lot, and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Everything had gone precisely according to plan. Nethan watched as the overseer finally relaxed. A broad smile spread across the man's face as he stepped forward and swiftly counted the stacked bales. After confirming every item, he nodded in satisfaction. "All accounted for," he announced. "These branches from the prized Atom Tree are yours now, Nethan." Chapter 33. Chasing Troops. The quay was alive with hungry eyes. Under their watchful stares, Nethan's men had hauled the colossal branches of the fabled treasure tree, Atom, aboard his vessel, and lashed them down with heavy ropes. This tree, said to be worth 200 million Baileys, drew covetous glances from every pirate within sight. Yet none dared challenge the crew now, still haunted by tales of Nethan's ruthless assault only days before. A low murmur rose among the onlookers. With that timber, he could build the strongest ship in the West Sea, one pirate whispered. The Navy won't intervene until it's too late. Others nodded, glancing toward the horizon as they speculated whether the royal fleet was already on its way to contain his ambitions. Unfazed by the speculation, Nethan strode across the deck to the quartermaster. "Cast off," he ordered. The crew sprang into action, untethering the lines, hauling in the anchor, and adjusting the sails. The vessel eased away from the crowded terminal, cutting through the silver waters of the bay. Their destination lay east of the Land of Flowers, Shipman Town, the preeminent shipbuilding center of the West Sea. There, master shipwrights and eager apprentices labored day and night, forging hulls that would brave any storm, and, Nethan hoped, outmatch any pursuing fleet. As the wind filled their sails, the promise of new beginnings and fresh challenges lay just beyond the horizon. The keel of the new ship was already secured in place, and all the remaining timber and ironwork could be purchased in Boatman Town. They still had over 90 million Baileys in reserve, more than enough. Standing on deck, Nethan gazed out at the pale horizon and said, "Once this vessel is ready, our next port of call will be the Grand Route." "The Grand Route," Robin echoed, leaning casually against the railing. Her calm, sea-colored eyes brightened with a familiar fire. For years, she had dreamed of tracking down the lost stone tablets of history, those weathered monoliths whose inscriptions held untold secrets. Many of the tablets' texts had eroded over time, leaving gaps that begged to be filled. From the clandestine files she'd assembled in every port, Robin knew that the majority of these relics lay hidden along the Grand Route. That notorious corridor of water had earned its reputation as the pirates' graveyard. Ships vanished there, crews were annihilated without a trace, and entire pirate lords were said to have met their end beneath its rolling swells. Still, if Robin was to recover the missing passages of history, it was the only place she could go. She stole a quiet glance at Nethan's broad shoulders, determination shining in her eyes. Danger be damned. The Grand Route awaited. I don't know why, but following Nethan gives her this unshakable conviction that somehow she really might reach that distant dream of hers. As their skiff slipped away from the island, the Land of Flowers blurred into the morning mist, shrinking on the horizon. Just as the island turned into a tiny, dark speck, a second ship's silhouette emerged behind them, fast and closing in. Robin was the first to see it. "Captain Rhodes, I think we've got company." Nethan stepped up beside her on the stern rail. "The Navy?" "Looks like the 8 treasures fleet of the Land of Flowers," Robin said, voice tight. The pursuing vessel loomed ever larger, its lines clear at last. Immense in size, yet it carried no official colors, only the black flag of pirates fluttering at its masthead. Nethan glanced at the skull and crossbones flag, then gave a small, wry smile. "I should have expected as much. Do you really think the Pirates of the Flowers would let me walk off with 200 million Baileys in treasure without a chase?" He scanned the deck. "Where's Adam? Has he taken up the crow's nest?" Nethan's light sailboat strained under the weight of the massive Adam tree branch he'd retrieved, its speed all but halved. Before long, the sleek pirate ship of the Land of Flowers had caught up and was bearing down on him. Board that pirate vessel, dozens of cutthroats stood at the ready, weapons in hand. Perhaps some remembered the carnage Nethan had left in his wake and dared not provoke him. But these weren't ordinary West Sea ruffians. Their captain had carved out a fearsome reputation on the Grand Line itself. To his crew, the likes of West Sea pirates were no more than unarmed villagers. Sure enough, Nethan's heavily laden boat lacked the agility to keep its distance. On the deck of the Land of Flowers ship, Abu, a cadre of the 8 Treasures Navy and younger brother to the deputy pillar Lao Kai, leaned forward, 3 battle axes strapped across his broad back. His mouth curved into a predatory grin as he studied the approaching sailboat. In front of him stood Lao Kai himself, the deputy pillar, gripping a slender naginata with its long handle resting against the deck. His features were stern and time-worn, the kind of steady face that had weathered countless storms and skirmishes. He scanned the horizon as well, anticipation shining in his eyes. One notable absence hung over the scene. Chief Green Pepper was not aboard this ship. He was currently overseeing another vessel in the flotilla, leaving Abu and Lao Kai to bring down Nethan's prize on their own. With sails full and cannons primed, the pirates of the Land of Flowers closed in for the capture. Nethan braced himself. He knew this confrontation would test him as never before. 11 years have passed since the start of the Great Pirate Era. Lao Kai has yet to claim his place as a pillar of the 8 Treasure Navy, and Abu still serves as a mere junior officer. Nevertheless, both ride at the forefront of Captain Qingjiao's, known among many as Green Pepper Squadron, carving a path through the Grand Line. "Report! Enemy vessel has entered cannon range," a lookout cried, his voice cutting through the sea breeze. Lao Kai held up a hand. "Hold your fire," he ordered. "Don't risk shattering that Adam wood plank. It's worth 200 million berries." Abu frowned at the looming ship. "Adam wood isn't so fragile, but if we fire now, they'll slip through our nets." As the 2 ships drifted within shouting distance, no one needed telescopes to make out the figures on deck. On Lao Kai's bow stood himself and Abu, the 13th column of the 8 Treasure Navy, yet there was no sign of their captain, Green Pepper. Below decks, Nethan and Robin huddled in the shadows of the forecastle. Robin leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. "Captain Green Pepper carries a 500 million berry bounty. He's far beyond our strength to challenge." Nethan nodded. Even without seeing the target's true power, he understood the risk all too well. For now, they would watch and wait, knowing that some battles must be chosen with care. "If Qingjiao really is aboard that ship, my only choice will be to cripple the 8 Treasures Navy's vessel and get away. But if the Green Pepper isn't there," Nethan's eyes went ice cold. He sized up the enemy ship from afar, gauged the distance between the 2 decks, and spoke in a level, almost casual tone. "Hold your position. I'll be back in a moment." Before his words had barely died away in Robin's ears, he was already airborne. Pushing off with a single powerful kick, he took 2 giant strides in midair, cleaving through the sea breeze in a perfect arc, and dropped down onto the stern of the 8 Treasures ship. All at once, the pirates aboard froze in stunned silence. Nethan landed as light as a feather, barely making a sound on the wooden deck. "What? Moonstep?" Abu and Lao Kai spun around, eyes wide, staring at Nethan as though they'd seen a ghost. They'd followed Qingjiao through the Grand Line. Their knowledge was far from shallow, and they recognized the signature trace of his footwork immediately. The Moonstep, an advanced 6th Fleet technique considered nearly impossible to master, had just appeared before them in full display. Nethan hovered just off the pirate ship's deck, the afterimage of his hastily mastered moonlight step flickering out behind him. In the Navy, only flag officers ever dared, let alone succeeded, in using this technique. He'd stumbled into it by accident, and though it had carried him across the waves in an instant, he had no intention of simply barging aboard. These men claimed to fear him already. He wanted to see how brave or reckless they really were. Below, the pirates jeered. They'd heard of the most vicious pirate of the West Sea, but on the Grand Line, that notoriety counted for little. Abu, the crew's axe-wielding lieutenant, strode forward with a roar, slammed his hand against the wooden rail, and signaled his men to clear the way. A savage grin split his face as he approached. Behind him, Lord Case, known among his own ranks as Lao Kai, leaned back against the mast, arms folded, eyes sharp with amusement. Abu swung his axe once, twice, then froze. Nethan wasn't dodging. Instead, he simply set his foot firmly on the planks. With a sudden crack, a distorted ripple of energy speared outward from Nethan's shoe. The deck groaned as the twisted fruit power warped every plank in its path, bending beams and twisting nails. Pirates stumbled, shouting in panic as the ship itself seemed to shudder under an invisible blow. Abu's grin died. He dashed forward to strike, but the warped deck pitched beneath him, sending him sprawling. He scrambled to his feet, eyes blazing. "He's trying to tear this ship in half," someone yelled, fear breaking through every shout. Lord Case pushed off the mast, his amusement gone. He stared at the rippling wood, nodding slowly. Nethan's lips curved into a cool smile. He flexed his foot, and the ship's hull shuddered once more, a clear warning that the real fight was only just beginning. Abu froze for a heartbeat, then fury flared in his eyes. With a roar, he sprang to his feet and charged Nethan, swinging his axe down in a savage arc. Chapter 34. Twist Grip vs. 8-Chong Fist. Abu hefted his massive axe overhead, the steel blade glinting in the torchlight. Across from him, Nethan, calm and unflinching, simply raised his left hand. Without hesitation, he met the descending axe head squarely in his open palm. Abu sneered. "You think you can stop me with your bare hand?" he growled, redoubling his effort. Muscles bulging, he aimed to split Nethan's arm and cleave the axe in two. Instead, something astonishing happened. When the blade bit into Nethan's flesh, no blood spurted, and no bone shattered. A strange, invisible force surged through Nethan's arm, driving the axe blade backward into the air. Nethan flexed his fingers until they gripped the top of the blade. Like gripping a green bamboo stalk, he slowly began to twist. The steel screamed in protest, a sharp, metallic crack that echoed through the hall. The fisher crawled up the blade and then snaked down the length of the handle. Abu's eyes widened in shock. He could not believe what he was witnessing. His axe, one of the deadliest weapons in the land, was literally being wrung apart by a single man's hand. With a roar of frustration, Abu released his grip. The axe fell in two mangled pieces at Nethan's feet. Before Nethan could react, Abu's other fist shot forward like a cannonball, wrapped in rippling aura. 8-Chong Fist! Abu bellowed, gathering his internal energy into a devastating strike. Nethan braced himself, feet planted wide. The air around Abu's fist rippled, distorting like heat off a forge. Despite the savage power behind the blow, Nethan's expression remained unreadable as he prepared to meet the next challenge head-on. The rank-and-file 8 Treasures Marines, swords and cannons leveled at the pair, stalled in astonishment. As ordinary troops, they weren't even permitted to learn the legendary 8-Strike Fist, an art reserved for the Navy's most elite officers. Not long ago, Commander Abu had used those 8 blows to fell a notorious pirate lord with a 40 million berry bounty in a single strike. Now Abu's fists whirled toward Nethan in a familiar, unstoppable assault. Unfazed, Nethan cast aside his twisted battle axe, curled his fingers into a tight fist, and met Abu's charge head-on. An unsettling, spiraling energy crackled around his knuckles. Boom! When their blows met, impact and distortion collided in a thunderous clash that sounded like a cannon blast. Abu's 8-Strike Fist was famed for shattering shields and piercing armor. Yet Nethan's own twisting power, an equally uncanny force capable of warping steel, shattered every expectation. Neither man yielded an inch as the two energies roiled against each other, drawing every eye in the assembled ranks. Nethin's 8-chong fist was a highly refined boxing style, its fearsome twisting power drawn directly from his devil fruit ability. Bolstered further by the enhancements of the talent system, Nethin could wield that twist far more devastatingly than any ordinary fruit user. Across from him, Abu braced himself and unleashed his signature move, the 8 punches. Boom! 8 thunderous blows rocketed straight at Nethin, shockwaves rippling through the air. For a heartbeat, Abu's concussive force and Nethin's twisting defense locked in perfect stalemate. Then Nethin's power broke through. The spiraling energy shot up Abu's arm with a crackle, and in an instant his limb contorted, folding into a grotesque, impossible coil. "Ah!" Abu roared, pain and horror etched in his eyes. He had never imagined his 8 punches could be outright stopped, much less reversed so violently. Around them, the sailors of the 8 Treasures Navy gaped in stunned silence, some too shocked even to speak. Impossible! Lord Abu's signature technique beaten so completely? From a short distance away, Lao Kai, long knife in hand, witnessed Abu's arm twist like paper. His face went ashen. What manner of fighter was this Nethin, who could turn devilish power back on its wielder so effortlessly? Nethin hadn't thought Abu would be more than a minor nuisance, but he hadn't expected him to fall so quickly either. In 2 swift, merciless strikes, Abu lay on the deck, one arm severed. The cruel efficiency of it made even seasoned sailors flinch. Lao Kai's eyes blazed as he took in Abu's wound. He turned on Nethin, face an icy mask, and drew his long dao. Before he could advance, Nethin's voice cut across the surrounding chaos in a calm, almost bored tone. "If you dared to steal from me, you should have been prepared to pay the price." At his words, Nethin shifted his weight and stomped on the deck. Wood groaned and cracked beneath his foot, splinters flying as the ship's hull buckled under his force. The fracture spread outward like a web, the vessel's timbers twisting in protest. Lao Kai didn't hesitate. He let out a heavy sigh, brushing aside the quake that threatened to swallow them both. Abu was outmatched, he admitted, his voice low and solemn. That's the way of the world, strong prey on the weak. He raised his blade and glared at Nethin. But no one hurts my men and gets away with it. I am the 13th generation deputy pillar of the 8 Treasures Marine Army, and you will pay for this. With that, Lao Kai sprang forward, his long knife arcing through the air. Steel gleamed in the dim light of the broken deck as he aimed to cut Nethin down, and prove that even the strongest can fall if they underestimate their foe. Nethin shifted his stance in an instant, twisting his body like a sheet of paper to avoid Lao Kai's downward slash. At the same time, he curled his fingers into a tight fist and drove it straight toward his opponent. Lao Kai snorted, both hands gripping the long-bladed weapon's shaft. He planted his feet and met Nethin's punch head-on, the haft of the blade absorbing the impact with barely an inch of give. Boom! Nethin staggered, the full force of his strike rippling up his arm, but Lao Kai roared as he braced himself, resisting nearly all of that twisting power. From a distance, the Marines of the 8 Treasures Corps watched in stunned silence. None could recall witnessing such a steadfast defense, not even from Abu, Lao Kai's elder brother. Just weeks earlier, Lao Kai had taken down a notorious pirate whose bounty exceeded 100 million, earning a name for himself on the Grand Route. As Nethin pressed forward, he felt a strange aura clinging to the blade, an opposing energy that rebuffed his own. His eyes glinted with sudden clarity, and he let the words slip past his lips in a low, controlled voice. Armament color, domineering. Even pirates from the West Blue can sense hockey, and they're surprisingly adept at it. Old Kai snorted, planting his feet and gripping his knife shaft with both hands. With a sharp spin, he launched himself at Nethin, blades whirling like a storm. Devil fruit powers? Won't work on me, he jeered. Nethin arched an eyebrow but stayed calm. Armament hockey could indeed nullify devil fruit abilities, but hockey itself was graded by strength. All Old Kai could do was coat his weapon. He couldn't harden his entire body. Trying to ignore the power of Nethin's distortion fruit was nothing short of a joke. No one had ever settled the debate. Which was stronger, devil fruit ability or hockey? It was true that a weak devil fruit user couldn't break through hockey, but a feeble hockey wielder would crumble under a practiced fruit power. As Old Kai's blades rained down, Nethin made no attempt to dodge with his paper arts. Instead, He clenched his hand into a fist and concentrated every ounce of his distortion energy into one devastating strike. Distortion! Impact! He roared. A thunderous shockwave exploded from his fist, meeting Old Kai's onslaught head-on in a burst of concussive force. The battlefield trembled under the collision of two titans, relentless haki and unyielding devil fruit power. Nethan sprang forward and drove his fist straight into the maelstrom of sword spirits swirling around Lao Kai's blade. In that instant, the air itself seemed to warp and shatter as the raw force of his pu nench detonated through the ghostly swords, and the very edge of Lao Kai's long knife snapped in two. A thunderous crack echoed through the clearing as the blade fractured bit by bit under the crushing blow. Lao Kai's arm recoiled, sleeves ripping to tatters, and he was sent tumbling backward, tumbling across the ground before skidding to a halt. He lay there for a heartbeat, fingers trembling around empty air, a thin sheen of blood on his palm where the blade had shattered against him. Nethan landed lightly on his feet, eyes cold. "Is that really all you've got?" he asked, voice level. "I'm surprised I ever underestimated you." A storm cloud darkened in Lao Kai's gaze. He sat up, brushing splintered metal fragments from his robes, his hand clenched so tight that his knuckles turned white. "Very well," he growled. "Then I'll show you my full power." With a roar that split the stillness, Lao Kai launched himself skyward. He didn't form a fist. Instead, his body flipped gracefully in midair. As he spun, one leg whipped up, wrapped in crackling, weaponized aura. Gathering every ounce of strength, he unleashed the final strike of his eightfold fist technique, the martial heel. A blazing shockwave pulsed around his foot as he slammed it down toward Nethan's head. The earth trembled under its force. Nethan felt no fear. He channeled his distortion power to its fullest and launched a merciless punch. Boom! The twisting energy fused with the blow's raw force, sending his fist, followed by a barrage of kicks, into a violent collision that ripped the air apart like a thunderclap. A shockwave burst outward in all directions. At the center of their confrontation, Nethan's power strained the ship's hull. The deck beneath them cracked in a spiderweb pattern, fissures racing outward to carve the damaged vessel into two halves. Chapter 35. Beheading. "Everyone, fall back! The deck's about to give way!" Cracks spidered outward from beneath their feet, and the Marines of the 8 Treasures Battalion stumbled as the planks buckled. Abu, clutching his injured arm, watched in mounting dread as Nethan and Lao Kai's savage duel ripped the ship apart. A deafening boom echoed through the hull when Nethan's punch met Lao Kai's guard. The shockwave shuddered through the deck, and Nethan staggered back a step, his fist still trembling from the force. Relief flickered among the crew, until Lao Kai cracked his knuckles, leapt into the air, and somersaulted 3 meters across the deck before slamming down in a spray of splintered wood. With that final impact, the planks surrendered. Centered around the two fighters, the deck heaved, exploded in a web of fractures, and collapsed beneath them. Nethan kicked off the breaking boards and cleared the gap, landing hard against the railing. On the opposite side, Lao Kai hopped on one leg, his injured limb quivering from the collision, and managed to vault to safety behind the ship's fence. He pressed himself against the rail, face drawn tight with pain, his twisted leg trembling under the strain. For a breathless moment, both warriors stood panting, the wrecked deck between them, as the rest of the 8 Treasures Marines crowded back in astonishment. The battle wasn't over yet, but for now, the ship itself had been the greatest casualty. Nethan's arm throbbed with pain. Though it hadn't been dislocated in their last collision, it was twisted badly enough to send pins and needles through his muscles. All the vaunted power of the 8-Chong fist, an heirloom technique of the 8 Treasures Navy, couldn't spare him that agony. He stood motionless for a heartbeat, jaw clenched, gathering himself against the numbness. Then, with a sudden tightening of his shoulders, he drove the pain back down and lunged. In an instant, Nethan's form blurred into an afterimage as he darted toward Lao Kai. His opponent's eyes widened. He hadn't expected Nethan to shrug off the fist's recoil so quickly, especially with his own legs still shaking from their earlier exchange. Lao Kai dropped into a low stance, his brows drawn together in concentration. He swung his right fist in a desperate counterstrike. Boom! The two blows met in midair. Compared to Lao Kai's devastating kicks, his punches were feeble, and this one felt even weaker than their very first crash. The impact rattled Lao Kai's arm more than Nethin's, and already, the momentum of the fight was shifting. Under Nethin's strike, the lower section of the boat's guardrail shattered, sending splinters flying. Lao Kai hurtled straight into the broken wood, embedded chest first in the jagged timber. With a sharp crack, he wrenched himself free, stumbling back and scrabbling for purchase to keep from toppling overboard. But Nethin gave him no quarter. He surged forward and unleashed a blur of fists so rapid they seemed multiplied 100-fold, like the 1,000-armed Shura, each blow hammering down in perfect succession. Lao Kai's eyes went wide with alarm. He managed a desperate grab at Nethin's arm, summoning a faint glimmer of his domineering aura, but there was no time to strike back. Cross-guarding his forearms before his chest, he forced every scrap of his martial energy into a protective shell. Still, Nethin's next punch drove through the barrier with bone-shuddering force. Though channeling that savage, twisting power through his combative technique lessened its raw intensity, the impact was real and brutal. Lao Kai's shield cracked before he could even call upon his eightfold fist, and the torque of Nethin's blow twisted every muscle in his arms like taffy around a nail. A breathless hiss escaped Lao Kai as pain lanced through him. He staggered, his defenses crumbling under the unrelenting assault. Nethin, eyes cold and unyielding, stepped forward, ready to finish what he'd begun. Nethin's arms burned with pain as he strained every muscle and bone, inching backward, hard as best he could. But the force of that last blow had already twisted and bruised his forearms so badly they swelled nearly shut. His body trembled under the onslaught of each crushing strike. No matter how strong his constitution or how proud his resolve, the power of this twist fruit simply overwhelmed him, inflicting damage with every punch, much like Whitebeard's quake fruit. From a short distance away, Abu clutched his own injured arm, grimacing at the brutal display. His voice shook with barely contained fury as he turned to the nearby members of the 8 Treasures Marine Corps. "Finish him! Kill that kid!" The Marines hesitated for only a heartbeat, shocked by how Nethin had managed to hold his ground against Lao Kai's relentless assault. But Abu's command left them no choice. Cold sweat beaded on their brows. Then, gritting their teeth, they surged forward with swords drawn and cannons roaring. Boom! Boom, boom. A hail of bullets and flaming portable artillery shells screamed toward Nethin. Crews squeezed off round after round, filling the sky with lethal steel, and yet Nethin never flinched. He raised his arms in a calm, deliberate gesture, as if welcoming the onslaught. A silent pulse rippled from his palms, bending every incoming projectile beneath him. With a crackle of displaced energy, each round veered sharply off its course and slammed into Lao Kai instead. Lao Kai's eyes widened in shock. He tried to stagger back, but his swollen limbs gave out. One knee buckled, and blood exploded from his side in a dark spray. He clutched the ship's railing, white-knuckled, fighting for breath. Nethin watched without a word, chest rising and falling with steady control. Then he drew Chunli, the famed dagger gleaming at his hip, and stepped forward. His voice was quiet, almost regretful. "I'll give you a dignified end." With one swift motion, Nethin plunged the blade into Lao Kai's heart. The wound blossomed scarlet, and the enemy warlord toppled to the deck. Silence fell, broken only by the soft drip of blood and Nethin's measured breathing as he stood over his fallen foe. The soldiers of the 8 Treasures Marine Corps, who'd been surging forward with bayonets, rifles, and cannons at the ready, all froze in place. Muskets went silent, cannons stifled their thunder. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Every man stared in horror and disbelief at the motionless form on the deck. Lao Kai was dead. Lao Kai, the prodigious deputy pillar of the Navy, already famed for his exploits on the Great Sea Route, lay unmoving under the Western Sea sun. This had been billed as a routine expedition, a mere patrol, yet here he lay slain by a single adversary. You actually killed the deputy pillar," someone finally whispered, voice trembling. A death like this was unthinkable. Among the many descendants of leader Qingjiao, none had been so carefully groomed as Lao Chai. From childhood, Qingjiao had vowed to raise him to pillar status in the 13th generation. Now his star lay extinguished at their feet, and no one could predict how Qingjiao would answer when he learned what had happened here. The name of the man who hadn't sailed in years had nearly faded from the world's memory, but not from the 8 Treasures Marine Corps. They still whispered his legend in every harbor from South Blue to the Grand Line, the Green Peppercone. Long before the golden age of pirates, he'd prowled every sea lane, and his bounty? 500 million berries. On the deck below, Abu knelt beside Kai's fallen body. Kai lay motionless, his breath a shallow gasp, his heart nearly stilled. Cold sweat dripped down Abu's brow as he remembered how Kai's father would rage if he heard of this defeat. He feared nothing more than the old man's vengeance. He dreaded that, once word spread, they'd be torn apart by a father's fury. Abu's eyes locked on Nethan, emotions flickering, horror, despair, disbelief. "It's over for you," he stammered. "Even if you vanish into the Grand Line, you can't hide. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. My father." His voice caught in his throat as a sudden flash of steel silenced him. Nethan withdrew the blade with unhurried calm. Blood arced into the air in a single crimson spray. He sheathed his sword and met Abu's terrified gaze. "Go ahead," he said softly, voice steady. "If I'm not afraid of the Navy or the world government, why should I fear an old man left behind by time?" Chapter 36. Cultivation Notes. Nethan stood on the blood-stained deck as the last of the 8 Treasures Marines fled into the night. He'd just slain Lao Kai and Abu, 2 of the greatest hidden threats under the guise of Green Pepper's navy, and though the fight had drained him, the remaining Marines posed no real challenge. Because their aliases hid their true bounties, Nethan only received 10 points of talent proficiency instead of the full 30 or 20 million berries. Still, he counted it a fair reward. The enemy ship groaned and buckled around him, its timbers splintering from the battle. Before it collapsed into the sea, Nethan took a final sweep, hoping to salvage anything of value. Amid broken planks and scattered weaponry, he found a small, iron-bound chest tucked beneath the captain's desk. Inside lay a single notebook, its leather cover cracked with age, the words "Domineering Cultivation Notes" stamped in faded silver ink. Curiosity sparked, Nethan claimed his prize and retreated to his own cabin. By the glow of a single lantern, he opened the notebook. Only 2 pages remained, but they were dense with diagrams, cryptic formulas, and step-by-step instructions for awakening domineering chi, a legendary power he'd only heard whispered about. Heart pounding, Nethan traced the strange characters with his finger. If even half of this manual proved genuine, it could change everything. He closed his eyes, committing the first lines to memory. A meditation to align mind and spirit, a breathing method to channel your will into raw energy. The lamp flickered as he sat motionless, determined to master whatever secrets this scrap of paper held. In the silent room, Nethan sensed something stir deep within him, a hint of power waiting to be unleashed. And he knew, without a doubt, that his journey into domination had just begun. Nethan finally had the cultivation method in his hands. If he could master the domineering sight technique directly from these notes, he'd save himself 1 talent point. No need to unlock it through the system. The only pity was that the complementary notes for its armed application, the armed domineering sight, were missing. What remained were just 2 pages on sight and sound domineering sight, a 6th sense ability beyond the usual 5. It let its user detect an enemy's presence, anticipate strikes from out of sight, and read subtle fluctuations in their voice or aura. He spread those 2 tattered pages out on his desk and studied them intently. Strictly speaking, they weren't a full cultivation manual, only the core training points. But Nethan already understood the basic principles of domineering sight, and these highlights were enough for him to deduce a workable practice routine. By candlelight, he read through the document again and again, then carefully transcribed every line into his own notebook, fleshing out details where the original notes were sparse. As his pencil moved across the paper, his features grew ever more focused. With these distilled insights, he was ready to pioneer the complete path to domineering sight. Nethan paused for a moment, then stepped into the training chamber and began transforming its interior. Within minutes, ropes hung from the ceiling, each suspending a spherical sandbag of varying size. He'd copied this layout from the practice room aboard the Babao Shui battleship, designed specifically to cultivate a commanding aura, a latent power everyone carries once their physique reaches a certain threshold. When the last rope was secured, Nethan moved to the center of the room and took in the positions of the hanging bags. He closed his eyes, drawing all his focus and energy inward. Then, in a single, explosive motion, he struck out, his fists slicing through the air to connect with the 4 nearest sandbags. Thud! 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 The bags flew outward along 4 unique arcs, each trajectory determined by its size and the precise timing and force of Nethan's blows. Some even collided with neighboring sandbags, sending them crashing into one another, with deep, resonant booms that echoed off the chamber walls. Nethan stood in the center of the training chamber, listening intently to the soft whoosh of swinging sandbags. He closed his eyes, shifted his weight, and struck out with a single, powerful punch. 2 bags flipped over, thudding to the ground upside down. The other 2, however, eluded him, and one barely missed his head. Judging an attack by sound alone was infinitely harder than relying on sight. He opened his eyes for a moment, studied the 4 bags' positions, then shut them again. Carefully placing his feet, he braced himself to confront them once more. In his hand, the master's notes listed only a handful of crucial pressure points. No step-by-step drills. But Nethan remembered the chamber's layout as it had been on the 8 treasures sale. From that map in his mind, he'd already pieced together the basic training routine. Boom, boom, he struck out again, delivering a flurry of blows in rapid succession. Concentrating on the sound each bag made slicing through the air, he adjusted his timing. Of his 4 punches, 3 connected, though even those landed slightly off target. Again, he murmured, opening his eyes to gauge the swaying bags before closing them once more. Every attempt honed his hearing, sharpened his instincts, and brought him one step closer to mastering the technique. Nethan's fists struck the 3 heavy bags in rapid succession. Bang, 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 bang. Having grown accustomed to this drill, his accuracy was already far superior to when he'd first begun. He paused only after several more solid hits, recalling the 10 talent proficiency points he'd just earned by defeating Lao Kai and Abu. With a steady breath, he activated his talent interface. A translucent panel materialized before him, listing each of his abilities. Nethan selected Agility Enhancement and pumped in all 10 points, raising its proficiency to 60. Almost at once he felt the change. His limbs lightened, his reaction time sharpened, and every movement seemed more responsive. It was as though invisible weights had fallen away. Nethan allowed himself a pleased smile, then returned to the punching bags, each strike now infused with even greater speed and precision. He moved with a confident, domineering grace that perfectly matched his ambitions. On the southern bank of the Land of Flowers, 2 warships lay moored at the pier. Where a flotilla of pirate vessels had once congested the waterfront, not a single ship remained. Each one vanished without a trace into the morning mist. Major General Ghost Spider stood on the quarterdeck of his flagship, eyes fixed on the scattered debris of the 8 treasures Navy vessels. Only a handful of shattered hulls remained afloat beneath the rising sun. He shook his head, the folds of his dark cloak rippling in the sea breeze. The 8 treasures Navy served as the sanctioned corsairs of the Land of Flowers, much like the Chiwuhai elsewhere, and they enjoyed a special arrangement with the world government's affiliated states. By custom, the Navy turned a blind eye to their raids, and the kingdom's court prized their service. Ghost Spider had personally pressed the Land of Flowers ministers to capture the infamous mercenary known as Ghost Hand Rhodes, known off the field as Nethan, dead or alive. Yet when the order arrived, Nethan had vanished without a trace. Pirates, he reminded himself, could never be trusted. A cold glint flickered in his eyes. At his side, Colonel Aram frowned, leaning in to speak quietly. "Sir, the 8 treasures Marines won't let this go unanswered. They'll demand justice for their fallen." Ghost Spider snorted, crossing his arms. "So you suggest we simply stand by and watch them settle scores?" His voice was low, edged with steel. Beneath his calm exterior, a darker plan was already taking shape. Admiral Ghost Spider stood on the quarterdeck, fixating on the ribbon of sea that vanished into the horizon. "I chose this course because I feared we'd never catch up with them," he admitted, voice low and sha. "RP, that can't happen again. If our Navy can't stop a handful of pirates, what good are we?" Colonel Marlowe bowed his head, shame coloring his cheeks. Yes, sir. Ghost Spider's gaze hardened. He's acquired a cutting from the atom tree, enough wood to build himself a brand new ship. He's been scouting every port within reach, but I'm certain his next destination is Boatman Town. He'll try to launch his vessel there. He paused, letting the weight of his words drift across the deck like a gathering storm. Then he drew himself up and spoke with iron resolve. Relay my orders at once. Every squadron is to alter course for Boatman Town. Engage the ghost hand pirates on sight and leave nothing afloat. I want them wiped out. No survivors. Below decks, the signal guns boomed in rapid succession. Across the fleet, sails were trimmed and anchors weighed. As each warship turned into the wind, a single, deadly purpose bound them all, to intercept the enemy before they could ever set sea again. Chapter 37. Kukanorfa's Boatman's Town Harbor Pier. 3 days had passed since the destruction of Lao Kai, Abu and their followers. Although Huajiguo lay only a short distance from Shipong Town, the slow-moving logboat carried them through 2 nights and finally brought them into port by noon on the 4th day. Inside Nethan's training cabin, 5 heavy sandbags swung in silent arcs around him. He stood motionless at the center, eyes closed, launching swift, precise strikes at each bag as it approached. Most of the time, his fist connected solidly with its target. Every so often, however, he misjudged the bag's path and found himself on the receiving end of a crushing blow. Mastering the power known as the Domineering was proving far more challenging than Nethan had imagined. 3 days of relentless practice had at last revealed a hint of its presence, but he knew he was still far from breaking through the barrier that separated potential from control. Domineering was an energy latent in every person, yet few could sense it, and even fewer could harness it. The first, indispensable step was to become aware of its existence and to seize rudimentary command over it. Only then could one refine and strengthen that power through continual exercise. Nethan took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of his heart steady as he prepared for another round. The hardest step lay behind him, and the journey to true mastery was only just beginning. Nethan closed his eyes, reaching into the darkness as he sought to grasp that hidden, commanding presence within himself. A sharp knock on the cabin door pulled him from his concentration. "Captain Nethan, we've arrived at Boatwork Town's dock," came Robin's voice from the other side. "All right," he said, inhaling deeply. The sandbags suspended from the ceiling came to rest. He lingered for a moment, replaying the exercise in his mind, then rose and stepped out into the dawn light. Before him lay the bustling wharf of Boatwork Town. The island itself was modest, far smaller than the Land of Flowers, but its quay stretched surprisingly long, crowded with stacks of crates and barrels. This was no tourist haven, and the sight of a pirate vessel would hardly win them any favors. Robin fell into step beside him. "It's nothing like the Land of Flowers," she noted. "I doubt the locals will be eager to greet pirates." Nethan offered a cool shrug. "We don't sail for popularity. Let's move." With their crew left aboard, Nethan and Robin descended the gangplank and set foot on the dock. Nethan stepped off the pirate ship and onto the bustling dock, scanning the crowd for someone who could guide him across the channel. He spotted a burly dock worker hefting a pile of timber onto his shoulder. Without a word, Nethan flipped a gold coin through the air. It clinked into the man's hand. "Who's the best boatman around here?" Nethan asked. The worker stiffened at the sudden question, until he noticed the coin. He smiled and slipped it into his pocket. "They're all skilled, sir, but if you want the very best, you'll need Old Fitz. He seldom takes private jobs, but every ship he builds earns a legendary reputation." "Old Fitz? Kukanolfis?" Nethan echoed, intrigued. Nearby, Robin, the ship's navigator, lifted her head at the name. Her dark eyes brightened. "Kukanolfis? Here in Shelltown?" The dockworker nodded. "Yeah, he's been laying low for years. Few people even knew he'd returned." Nethan exchanged a look with Robin. "Who exactly is he?" Robin tapped her chin, recalling whisperings from her intelligence network. "If I remember correctly, he was the master shipwright who built red-haired Shanks's vessel. And Shanks is one of the 4 emperors of the sea." A low whistle escaped Nethan's lips. "Then we'd better find him, and fast." Chapter title: The 4 Emperors of the New World. Nethan cut Robin off mid-sentence and turned to the dock worker with a raised eyebrow. Shanks hails from the West Sea, he said. I never imagined the boat builder who crafted vessels for the 4 emperors would be here. Here, can we find him? The worker pointed down the lane. Go straight for 2 blocks, then turn right. At the end of that street is a rundown log cabin. He lives there. Nathan nodded and fell into step beside Robin. They passed 2 narrow streets, swung right, and soon spotted a lonely, weather-beaten cottage. Outside, half a dozen burly men loitered, their arms crossed and eyes narrowed. Captain, one of them, a scar running down his cheek, grumbled to the man beside him, who strapped a broad-bladed sword to his hip. Have we been duped? This is where the finest boatwright in the New World lives? The sword-bearer shrugged, though his eyes glittered with impatience. Forget appearances. Let's see if the rumors are true. Call him out. A third man stepped forward, booted the door, and bellowed inside. Hey, you in there! Step out! Our captain wishes to speak with you. Silence answered his shout. The wind sighed through the broken window panes as the men waited, tension coiling in the air. Nathan led his small crew down the narrow, overgrown path to the riverbank. Before them stood a battered wooden shack, its paint long peeled away, its timbers sagging. One of the burly men raised his boot and kicked the door twice, but it barely budged. Just as they exchanged glances, a sudden coughing hissed from within. Cough! Cough! The group tensed. A moment later, the door creaked open. An old man, his beard a tangled gray mass and his clothes in tatters, emerged rubbing his chest. He looked every bit the recluse, so much so that one of Nathan's men muttered, "This is supposed to be the best boatman? What a joke." The old man, known as Old Fizz, paid them no mind. He covered his mouth, coughed again, then reached for a weathered wine glass dangling from his belt. He took a slow sip, closed his eyes, and let out a contented sigh. The rasp of his voice cut through the evening air. "You want the best boatman, is that it? You've come to the right place." Nathan stepped forward, keeping his tone even. "Our captain requests your services. We need you to pilot us across the river." Old Fizz opened one eye, studied them, then shook his head. "I'm done with all that," he said flatly. A heavy silence fell. Finally, one of Nathan's thugs, a stocky fellow with a scar across his cheek, snapped. "Hey, old man, you know who our captain is?" He drew a pistol and leveled it at Fizz's chest. The barrel gleamed in the last light of dusk. Old Fizz didn't flinch. He set down his wine glass, leaned on his cane, and stared back with a crooked smile. "Oh, I know him," he said softly. "But you'll need more than threats to change my mind." Captain Fitzroy's gruff warning echoed across the pirate deck. "If you don't want to die, you'll cooperate." In the same breath, the old man's wrist snapped upward, and his pistol roared. One clean shot drilled through the nearest pirate's skull. Fitzroy brought the pistol to his lips, blew smoke from the barrel, and murmured, "I really didn't want to do that." The rest of the pirates stared in stunned silence. None had expected this frail-seeming veteran to pull a trigger so swiftly. Fury flared in their eyes as they drew cutlasses and daggers, moving to encircle him. Suddenly, crisp footsteps rang out behind them. "Stand down!" a calm voice commanded. 2 pirates whirled around just as Nathan's broad hands landed on their shoulders. With a sharp twist, he shoved them hard to either side. Bones snapped audibly, and both men collapsed in mangled heaps on the deck. The pirates froze, horror dawning on their faces. They turned toward Nathan, pupils shrinking with fear. "Who are you?" one of them whispered. Nathan said nothing. He strode forward through the stunned crowd, each step met by the sickening crack of ribs and joints as more men fell beneath his unrelenting pressure. The deck ran slick with blood and the echoes of broken bones, and still he walked on, unstoppable. Some of the pirates panicked and tried to flee, but Robin, following close behind Nathan and wielding her 30-shot flower hook, snap, ped every fleeing neck in an instant. Old Fitz had barely registered the skirmish. Pirate bloodshed meant little to him, even when Nathan appeared. But as soon as he saw Robin standing there, his blood ran cold. "Olvia?" he whispered, voice shaking. "No, that's impossible." "Olvia?" Robin, who usually bore an unflappable calm, froze. For the first time her composed mask cracked, and a flicker of shock passed across her face. "Olvia," Fitz repeated as if testing the name. "Nicole Olvia. You were Dr. O'Hara's lead archaeologist, and Nico Robin's mother." At the sound of her full name, Nicole Olvia, Robin's stance wavered. Nathan took a careful step forward, glancing between the two of them, sensing that secrets long buried were beginning to surface. Chapter 38. Warship Arrives. The harbor lay quiet in the pale light of dawn, save for the distant silhouette of a warship easing into its moorings. Its steel-gray hull glinted dully as the rising sun broke across the water. On the weathered planks of the pier stood Nethan and Nico Robin, eyes fixed on the formidable vessel, while old Fitz watched them both with a thoughtful expression. Robin's dark hair whipped around her face in the salty breeze. She turned to Fitz, her usually calm voice trembling with surprise. You knew my mother?" Old Fitz ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair and nodded. We sailed together for a time. I was hunting the history of my own family, and she, your mother, was searching for answers of her own. We crossed paths in far-flung ports, chasing legends and half-forgotten maps. Shock and something softer, regret perhaps, registered on Fitz's lined face. Robin's fists clenched at her sides, and Nethan moved to stand beside her, offering a reassuring presence. For a moment, even Robin's trademark composure wavered. She bit her lower lip as sorrow flickered behind her eyes. Fitz shifted his weight, glancing back toward the looming warship. "I never knew she had a daughter," he said quietly. "If I'd known, I should have asked sooner. I'm sorry, child." Robin exchanged a brief look with Nethan. Then she nodded, drawing a slow, steady breath. "If you truly knew her," she said softly, "tell me everything." Fitz gave a small, relieved smile. "Then come inside. There's much to say, and not a moment to lose." Together, they turned toward the old tavern at the pier's end. The warship's cannons loomed in the harbor, a reminder of the conflict on the horizon. But for now, time paused. Inside that dimly lit room lay the story of a woman both fierce and elusive, and the key to understanding the past that bound them all. Nethan followed old Fitz to the cabin door, where the old man beamed at him. "Ghost Hand Nethan," he said with a chuckle, "you're nothing like that indifferent monster the government rags have been lying about. Their papers are rotten, every word of it." He swung the door wide and beckoned Nethan, Rhodes, and Robin inside. The interior was as cluttered as the outside. Stacks of books, scattered newspapers, and dusty trinkets crowded every surface. Unfazed, old Fitz dragged out 2 small wooden benches. Without a word, Rhodes and Robin settled onto them, paying no mind to the mess. As old Fitz began to speak, Robin sat perfectly still, her expression composed and her eyes fixed on him. Nethan leaned forward, curious. Fitz cleared his throat and in a low, steady voice unraveled everything he knew about Olivia, Robin's mother. He spoke of whispered rumors in the resistance, of Olivia's fierce courage, and of the price she'd paid for defying the directorate. Robin didn't flinch or shed a tear. She simply listened, her emotions locked behind a calm facade. Nethan, who'd never taken much interest in Olivia's story, found himself surprised by the depth of her sacrifice and by how little of it had ever reached his ears. When old Fitz finished, he lifted the jug resting on a nearby crate and took a long sip, his gaze dropping to the floor. Silence filled the cabin for a moment before Nethan caught Fitz's eye, ready to ask the questions that had formed in his mind. There are 3 legendary weapons in this world: Hades, Pluto, and the Heavenly King. Hades isn't a god at all, but a warship, so fearsome that a single broadside could obliterate an island's fleet. Pluto was the crowning achievement of every master shipwright and engineer of that age, the ultimate weapon at sea. And as fate would have it, one of old Fitz's ancestors was among the craftsmen who built Hades. Driven by a yearning to uncover his family's lost legacy, old Fitz once joined Captain Olvia's expedition, sailing alongside a team of archaeologists in search of the fabled vessel. In the end, they recovered only fragments of its story. A hush fell over the room. Old Fitz lifted his wineglass and took a full sip, then turned to Robin and Nethan. "Well, that's enough history from me. You two must be half asleep listening to an old man drone on. If there's anything you'd rather discuss, it's got to be shipbuilding, right? After all, that's why I've come, to help you build your own vessel." Robin lowered her eyes without replying, while Rhodes gave Fitz an encouraging nod. The old man rapped his palm against his forehead with mock exasperation. "I should have known," he muttered. Glancing helplessly between Robin and Nethan, he sighed. "Honestly, can't you let me enjoy my retirement? All I want is to lend you my expertise and build a ship worthy of legend." If the world government ever discovers this, old Fitz will have to vanish into Tibet once more. Nathan simply smiled and said nothing. Everyone knew how close Fitz had been to Robin's mother, and now Robin, branded the devil's own son and wanted by every government agent, was serving under Nathan aboard this very ship. There was no way Fitz could stand idly by. Sure enough, after exchanging a solemn glance with Robin, the old man sighed. I cannot turn my back on my old friend's only child. Let these creaky bones have one last adventure. He rose to his feet and fixed Nathan with a determined look. Have you gathered the shipbuilding supplies yet? Don't tell me you've come to me empty-handed. I can't build a vessel from thin air. Nathan shook his head. We have most of what we need, except for one crucial piece, the branch of the atom treasure tree. Fitz's eyes gleamed. The 42-meter atom branch? So it really is in your possession. Excellent. We'll use it as the keel. I'll guard it with my life. A warship never sets sail without a true northwest wind behind her. It had been Nathan's ancestors who engineered the power plant for the legendary cruiser Pluto. Though every original drawing and specification was long since lost, the Kukunor shipyards remained unrivaled in hull design and propulsion efficiency. Thank you for your work. Here's your payment. Nathan set a heavy leather satchel on the bench and unfastened it to reveal 80 million Baileys in crisp, numbered bundles. Old Fitz's eyes lit up at the sight. He didn't refuse. Instead, he lifted the bag, flipped it open, and quickly counted a few stacks. This is more than enough. Even if we source the finest auxiliary components, you'll still have 10 to 20 million Baileys left over. Nathan, you won't have to worry about provisions or a night on the town for a long while. Slinging the satchel over his shoulder, Fitz stood and turned toward the door. After only a couple of steps, he stopped and glanced back over his shoulder. One more thing, he said quietly. The Navy's been watching you. Government intelligence will pick up your trail soon enough. Even if I assemble a crew of boatwrights today, it'll still take at least 7 days to finish the work. If any warships show up in that window. He let the unspoken warning hang in the air. Don't worry, he added. I'll make sure your shipyard stays undisturbed. Nathan rose, met Fitz's gaze with calm determination, and replied, There won't be a single warship near this yard. I'll handle everything from here. With that, Fitz gave a short nod, hoisted his bag of coins, and departed, leaving Nathan alone to keep his promise. Old Fitz smiled and pushed open the door of the wooden house. Robin rose quietly and followed Rhodes outside. As she slipped past him, she murmured, Thank you. You're welcome, old Fitz replied, closing the door behind them. With Fitz himself at the helm, backed by a trusted crew of veteran boatmen, and Rhodes and Robin organizing the rest, they managed to gather every plank, rope, and nail needed for the new ship in a single day. Fitz had once drafted plans for a sleek, high-speed hull, but no suitable timber existed until they discovered the massive branches of the legendary atom tree. These priceless logs were stronger than any other wood, perfect for both hull and frame. Ordinarily, finalizing the design would be the slow, most painstaking step. But with Fitz's blueprints already perfected and the prime materials on hand, he confidently announced, We'll have her seaworthy in 7 days. True to his word, he and his crew toiled around the clock. As sawdust flew and hammers rang out in Shipwright's town, word spread that 5 warships, led by the Navy Headquarters Major General, were steaming toward the harbor. By the afternoon of the second day, the fleet hove into view, its crests fluttering on the breeze, ready to oversee the birth of what promised to be the fastest warship on the sea. Chapter 39, Report. The Ghost Hand Pirate's ship has been sighted off the north shore of Shipman Town, a sentry announced from the deck of the Navy warship. He lowered his telescope and saluted smartly. Before him stood Rear Admiral Ghost Spider, clad in his Navy Justice cloak. A mere pirate who's never even sailed the Grand Line, Ghost Spider muttered, eyes cold as steel. I was reassigned from headquarters to the West Sea just to deal with him. For one inexperienced rogue, Nathan, of all names, the entire West Sea Command has scrambled, covering up intelligence, lobbying the government, dispatching vessels, chasing him across half the ocean. It's infuriating. He raised his voice and issued orders. Warship number 5 holds its course and seals off the northern exit. All other ships alter course to encircle the north shore. Do not let them escape. The colonel at his side snapped to attention. "Aye, sir." None of them would have guessed that Nethan, once a humble pirate hunter, would cause such an uproar after turning pirate. First, the branch colonel had been killed. Then the branch base commander's pursuit had failed. Finally, naval headquarters was forced to fly in a major admiral to bring the situation under control. At last, the crisis was drawing to a close. 5 warships now sealed off the Ghost Hand Sea, with more vessels racing to reinforce the blockade. There was simply no way through, and the band of thieves was doomed to vanish without a trace. On the western shore of Boatman Town, Old Fitz and 3 local boatmen hammered away at the emerging hull of a new ship. 4 burly workers lugged fresh planks onto the slipway, piece by piece shaping the vessel's frame. Just as Old Fitz drove another nail home, he glanced to the horizon and froze. A dark silhouette loomed on the water, a naval warship, closing in at full speed. There wasn't a naval branch base anywhere near this stretch of sea. The nearest lay 10 days' sail away. Had the Navy's response been any slower, the ship might already have slipped into open water, too late to stop now. But today, their escape would be cut off before the keel was even fully set. Nethan felt a cold shock run through him. In barely 2 days, the Royal Navy had mustered an entire squadron, 5 massive warships, and closed in on them. He had been certain the nearest naval base would need at least 10 days to reach this part of the West Sea. He never imagined the Navy would both assemble such a force so quickly and trail Rhodes's ship this closely. He had grossly underestimated the Crown's determination to eliminate Cade Rhodes. 1 or 2 frigates might have been no match for Rhodes's most fearsome pirates, but 5 ships operating in concert were a different matter altogether. Their overlapping cannon lines formed a nearly impenetrable web of firepower. Old Fizz, who owned some of the most celebrated vessels in these waters, had never once boarded a pirate ship. He could handle petty raiders who dared to ambush his merchantmen, but against a full naval armada he felt utterly powerless. If only they'd had a few more days to prepare. He clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. At this rate, even if Nethan managed to leap aboard Rhodes's flagship, they might not break the blockade in time. The fleet was too strong, their guns too numerous, and the sea itself had turned against them. The armada of 5 warships hung on the horizon, their combined firepower more than enough to obliterate Nethan on the spot, leaving no chance for escape. How could Old Fizz possibly protect Olivia's children from here? He grimaced, mind racing for a solution that would let Nethan and Robin slip away. He had powerful friends. Even the red-haired Shanks owed him a favor. But in this world, he couldn't simply call Shanks in and expect him to materialize out of thin air. By now, it was too late. Every plan he conceived faltered, for the enemy fleet had closed fast. They were surely tailing Nethan already. It was a disaster. On the north shore of Shipwright Town, inside the training hold of an old galleon, Rhodes stood surrounded by 5 heavy sandbags suspended from the ceiling. He pummeled each one in turn, fists ablur, unleashing a flurry of blows that echoed through the timbered hull. Shipbuilding noises drifted in from the docks outside, but Rhodes paid them no mind. He devoted himself wholly to refining a fighting style as ruthless as it was commanding, drilling his body and spirit until every strike felt like the roar of a cannon. Determined to master this dominating technique as quickly as possible, he trained without pause. Nethan trained every day without fail. Even when exhaustion weighed on him like a lead cloak, he refused to give in, because he knew that one skipped workout would quickly become 2, then 3. He would not let fatigue serve as an excuse for idleness. From the moment the talent system first activated, its disembodied voice had warned him, "Host, do not over-rely on the system." He didn't fully understand what dangers such dependence might bring, but he trusted the warning. After all, if the system had appeared out of nowhere, it could vanish just as easily, along with every advantage it had granted him. If that happened, he'd be left with nothing but his own strength and skill. Better, he decided, to build his muscles and reflexes now, so that no sudden disappearance could undo all his progress. So day after day, he pushed himself. His fists struck the heavy bags with a rhythmic crack, wham, wham, and each impact sent reverberations of power up his arms. In the solitude of the training hall, Sweat stung his eyes, and his breath came in sharp, controlled bursts. But as he moved, a deep calm settled over him. He felt every sinew in his body, every draw of air into his lungs, every shift of weight in his feet. In those moments, nothing existed beyond the precise motion of muscle and the satisfying thud of a well-placed punch. This was the only constant he could trust, his own unyielding will. And so he would train, again and again, until even the system itself would have to take notice. Nithin's awareness suddenly slipped free of his body. He watched, detached, as his own arms sent repeated blows into the swaying sandbag. The strange sensation washed over him in waves. He felt as though he were both observer and observed. He'd never experienced anything like this before. Though he'd practiced countless hours, he had never touched this particular state, one he'd only read about in that mysterious journal. In it, the author described a condition in which every muscle, every tendon, and bone could be summoned to obey conscious will with absolute precision. Nethin now realized that he was living it. A thrilling clarity grounded him. He could detect the smallest shift in muscle fiber, the subtlest creak in joint and ligament. More than that, he sensed an almost arrogant power surging beneath his skin, a power of perception and action so refined that it felt inhuman. The journal had called it the supreme state, an ability not so much born of raw strength, but of total, microscopic control. Most people never awaken it, their bodies too untrained, their spirits too timid. That's why, in ordinary life, it remains dormant, invisible. Yet in moments of mortal peril, when death itself hovers on the edge of awareness, this hidden gift can flare to life. Witnesses report time slowing to a crawl, the path of a speeding bullet tracing itself in the air as if frozen. Nithin understood now. He had glimpsed that power, and now he stood on the brink of mastering it. Nethin felt it at last, the brush of death that ignites the spirit and unleashes an overwhelming presence in an instant. Most people catch only a fleeting glimpse of that power in a life-or-death moment. Once the danger passes, the sensation evaporates almost as quickly as it arrived. But Nithin was determined to do more than experience this force by accident. He had to learn to call it up, observe it, and master it at will. Calm, observe, calm, he repeated in his mind, forcing his heart to slow and his thoughts to settle, even as that extraordinary energy throbbed within him. Time lost all meaning as he stayed locked in this disciplined cycle of concentration. Then, almost without warning, he sensed something new, a subtle current of air, barely perceptible, swirling against his skin as though his power had slipped its bounds. He froze. In an instant, the breath of wind vanished. He sucked in a breath, excitement surging through him. That was it, proof that his presence could extend beyond himself. A triumphant smile spread across Nethin's face. He was on the verge of a breakthrough, and nothing would stop him now. Nethin's eyes gleamed with excitement. He felt no frustration at having slipped out of that heightened state. If he could sense it once, he was certain he could do it again, even a third time. Mastering this overwhelming power of sight and sound was well within his reach. It was only a matter of practice before he could control and wield it at will. He drew in a steadying breath, quieted his racing thoughts, and prepared to resume his training. Just then, the door to the chamber swung open, and Robin strode in, his expression tense. "Captain," Robin announced, "the Navy's arrived." With a flick of his hand, Nethin froze the sandbags that had been circling him in midair. "Only 2 days?" he murmured. "They must have been tracking me ever since I left the land of flowers." Robin's nod was grave. "There are 3 medium-sized warships positioned around us so far. We can't rule out more ships on the way. Normally, the West Sea Naval Base deploys 2 medium ships and 4 smaller vessels, a total of 6. But right now, we've confirmed 3 mediums, and there could be others lurking beyond radar range." Nithin closed his eyes for a moment, weighing the odds. Then he lifted his chin. "Very well. Let them come. We'll be ready." Robin had always respected Nithin's power, but the sight of 5 warships on the horizon made him uneasy. Whether these vessels had been gathered from nearby outposts or dispatched from beyond the Western Sea, one thing was certain: they answered directly to Admiral Rhodes. "Navy in force," Robin murmured, nodding toward the distant line of hulls cutting through the waves. "This is the kind of fleet that could sweep aside the entire quartet. Even if every pirate crew in the Western Sea with a bounty over 30 million doubloon banded together, they'd have to turn tail and run. Nathan allowed himself a faint, wry smile. 5 ships to arrest me? Admiral Rhodes must think I'm a threat worth humbling. He straightened the collar of his shirt, smoothing out the creases, then strode past Robin and pushed open the cabin door. On deck, the salt wind whipped against his face as he studied the approaching Navy fleet. Closer now, the crisp lines of gray warships gleamed under the afternoon sun, their bows cut through the swell, each one flying Rhodes's emblem. Nathan folded his arms and watched, unflinching, as the Admiral's armada closed the distance, ready either to parley or to fight. Chapter 40. Destroying the Warship. 4 sleek warships eased along the northern shoreline, closing in on the lone vessel where Nathan had taken refuge. On each deck, naval captains stood tense and alert, hands gripping sword hilts. Their target was Rhodes, the infamous Ghost Hand, whose ruthless raids had thrown the West Sea into chaos. "Colonel, sir," the artillery major called from the starboard battery of the lead ship. "The enemy craft is about to enter firing range. Are we cleared to open fire?" The colonel studied the distant pirate schooner through his field glass. Its black hull cut a ghostly silhouette against the foam-flecked waves. He lowered the glass and shook his head. "Not yet. No orders from the flagship. Hold your fire." The major swallowed his frustration. "With all due respect, sir, Rhodes is a notorious butcher. His men whisper he's nothing less than a demon at sea. A broadside assault could cripple us. He's cunning enough to lure us in and blow us to splinters. I propose we launch a boarding party instead, storm the deck, seize the ship, and end this at sea." The colonel's jaw tightened. "Your zeal is commendable, Major, but you're overstepping. Until we receive explicit instructions, we maintain formation and keep our powder dry. Besides, we still can't confirm Rhodes himself is aboard that ship." The major's shoulders slumped, but he saluted crisply and stepped back into the shadows of the gun deck. Around them, the other warships held position, sails taut in the evening wind. Somewhere amid the distant black hull and churning sea, Rhodes waited, and so did the order to strike. "Don't worry," the colonel snorted. "Major General Nathan, known as the Ghost Spider, has been dispatched by headquarters. Even if that so-called Ghost Hand Rhodes really is a demon, he'll be dragged to hell, kicking and screaming." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the order crackled through the loudspeaker on the flagship. "All artillery ready. Aim at the enemy ships. Prepare to fire." A collective sigh of relief swept through the crews of the 5 warships. Sailors sprang into action, ramming cannonballs into the barrels and adjusting their sights on Rhodes's pirate vessel. With that many ships converging, a single broadside would shatter the pirate ship beyond repair. But just as the flotilla closed in, guns bearing, ready to unleash their salvo, a lone figure vaulted onto Rhodes' deck. Before anyone could react, he plunged into the sea and then sprinted across its surface. "Is that a man?" someone gasped. "It's Ghost Hand Rhodes," another shouted. "He's actually running on the water." The sailors froze in stunned silence. Then, as the impossible sight registered, their jaws dropped and their eyes widened in awe and alarm. Nathan's silhouette appeared on the horizon, calmly striding across the sea toward the nearest battleship. Instantly, alarms blared throughout the fleet. Sailors raced to their posts on every deck, and Colonel Briggs's voice rang out over the roar of the engines. "Don't let him get close. Open fire on the Ghost Hand Rhodes." Gunners swung the barrels into position, swallowed their surprise, and squeezed the triggers. Then came 3 simultaneous thunderclaps. Boom, 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 as a furious volley of shells tore into the water around Nathan. Explosions ripped up waves and spray in a blinding storm of smoke and fire. On the bridge of the flagship, Major General Elias Ward, better known as Ghost Spider, stood with a cigarette perched at the corner of his mouth. He drew in a slow drag and exhaled a ribbon of gray smoke, watching the scene with cool amusement. "He actually dared to press the attack at sea," he murmured. "Does he think our broadsides are merely decoration? Even I wouldn't be so bold." A sardonic smile curved his lips. However, almost before the last splash of shellfire had settled back into the sea, Ghost Spider's smirk froze. There, running across the water as if it were solid ground, was Nathan, his uniform bone-dry, his flesh unmarked. Not a single droplet clung to him. How was this possible? Ghost Spider narrowed his eyes, ready to probe further, when the guns aboard the nearby warships thundered to life again. A second, even heavier bombardment rained down on the exact spot where Nethan ran. Explosions ripped waves skyward, spray cascaded in every direction, and yet Nethan emerged unscathed. Shells and seawater alike parted before him, as though he walked through mist. Something was terribly wrong. Not only did the shells fail to strike him, but not even a ripple formed under his feet. It was as if he bore no weight at all. A chill ran through Ghost Spider's spine as he remembered the intelligence reports on Nethan's abilities. Panic clawed at his mind. Be careful. The figure on the sea isn't real. It's a phantom conjured by his power. However, at that moment I realized it was already too late. From my vantage point on the open sea, I watched Nethan sprint across the waves toward the small warship. With a single effortless leap, he cleared the water and landed on deck. Thud. Yet it sounded as solid as any wooden plank beneath his boots. It was as if his physical form and the phantom image I'd been following had finally fused. A Navy colonel aboard the ship stared at Nethan in horror. "Open fire!" he bellowed, desperate to have his men repel this impossible intruder with musket volleys. But before a single command could echo through the ship, the deck beneath Nethan's feet began to twist. The polished hardwood rippled as though it had turned into living water, waves radiating outward from his standing point. The timbers creaked and buckled, the entire hull shuddering with a thunderous clatter. Boom, boom, boom. Panicked sailors raised their muskets and fired in rapid succession at Nethan's feet. He didn't so much as flinch. Instead, he spread his arms wide, welcoming the hail of bullets. Each shot either glanced harmlessly off his hands, skidded in furious curves through the air, or simply stalled in mid-flight, frozen as if defying gravity itself. Under the horrified stares of crews on the surrounding warships, the little corvette, barely a few dozen meters long, suddenly bent in mid-hull as if seized by an invisible giant. Its steel plating creaked, groaned, and folded into a grotesque S-curve before collapsing in on itself. Ghost Spider, watching from the deck of a nearby cruiser, spat his stubbed-out cigarette into the sea and growled in frustration as the mangled wreckage shattered into splinters. From the debris, Nethan sprang up and sprinted straight for the next enemy ship. His boots slapped the rocking deck, seawater spraying around his ankles. Behind him lay the ruins of the first vessel, its hull torn to shards, almost every sailor aboard killed in an instant. "Open fire! Target him!" shouted the colonel. A thunder of cannon roars answered, dozens of shells hurtling toward Nethan. Yet each round passed right through him. He flickered in and out of solidity like a phantom. In the blink of an eye he was gone. Only the echoing boom of the guns marked his passing. Nethan sprinted alongside the battered hull of the second warship as the last echoes of the artillery barrage faded. Slamming his palm against the metal bulkhead, he unleashed his distortion ability. Steel walls buckled and warped inward, folding into a twisting vortex. A Navy colonel burst through a nearby breach, sword raised. "Halt!" he roared, blade descending in a deadly arc. Nethan didn't flinch. With his free hand, he tore open a shard of void and plucked the sword from mid-swing. The weapon's chi writhed in his grip like a serpent, then instantly unraveled into dust. Even the detached tip clattered free and ended up pinched between Nethan's thumb and forefinger. Pathetically flimsy swordsmanship. This blade once rivaled the famed Colonel Moby's in power, but now, in Nethan's hand, it crumbled as easily as ash at a snap of his fingers.